Hey guys, tonight we're doing something kind of insane. Something most people think they could do, but let's be honest, probably wouldn't survive more than a week. We're heading into the icy heart of Alaska, 1,000 miles from anything resembling a drive-through or Wi-Fi, to follow a man who didn't just go off-grid. He erased the grid completely. His name is Dick Proenneke, and in 1968 he flew into the remote Twin Lakes region of Alaska with a few tools, some camera gear, and an absurd amount of determination. He didn't just stay for a long weekend, he stayed for 30 years. That's right, 30 Alaskan winters, 30 summers of mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds, 30 years of chopping wood, making his own bread, and not once yelling at customer service. No electricity, no running water, and definitely no one around to hear him scream if things went sideways. And trust me, they could have gone sideways. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean it. Don't fake it. Oh, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are, and what city are you listening from? I want to know who else is curled up in the dark tonight with this weird little story. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So imagine, it's the summer of 1967, and you're in your early 50s. Your joints ache a little from a lifetime of hard work, and you've been in and out of the lower 48 your whole life, working as a carpenter, a diesel mechanic, a Navy man. You're not running from anything. You're not even necessarily chasing anything, but something inside you just shifts. The noise of the world feels a little too sharp. The speed, the clutter, the bills, the constant jabber. And suddenly, the idea of living simply, radically simply, doesn't seem so crazy anymore. It starts to sound like the only sane thing left. So you make a choice, go north, go way north. You pack a few essentials, a camera, a tripod, some notebooks, hand tools, no power tools, not even a chainsaw. You want this to be real. You want to earn it. Then you fly into the heart of Alaska, first to Anchorage, then to a gravel airstrip, then finally into the wild by bushplane, where you land on the glassy surface of Twin Lakes, somewhere near the spine of the Aleutian Range. There are no roads here, no neighbours, just endless trees, granite cliffs, and the unsettling silence of a place that hasn't been touched in 100,000 years. You step out of the float plane and the pilot gives you a curious look. You've brought gear, sure, but not nearly enough if this is anything more than a camping trip. He says something like, "You sure about this?" And you just smile, maybe give a little nod. The plane leaves, the engine fades, then it's just you and the mosquitoes. And let's be real, you probably won't survive this. The first few nights you sleep in an old cabin a friend built years ago. It's got holes in the roof and some questionable floorboards, but it's shelter. You cook simple meals, usually lentils or beans. You fish the lake, catch a grayling if you're lucky. You set up your camera and start filming. There's something meditative about watching the footage back at night. Grainy 16mm clips of trees swaying or clouds stacking over the mountains. It's not much, but it's proof. You're here, and no one else is. You start scouting the land. Where's the best spot to build? You need something close enough to the lake for water, far enough from the brush to avoid surprise visits from large furry predators. You find a slight rise, protected by a stand of spruce trees, with a panoramic view that makes you audibly mutter, "Yep, this is it. Your home base for the next 30 years. And here's where it gets nuts. You don't just throw up a tent or cobble together a shack. You build a log cabin from scratch, using nothing but hand tools and a shocking amount of muscle memory. Every log is felled, debarked, measured, and notched by you. You hoist them into place alone, using simple levers and patience. The floor is made from split spruce. The roof? Sod, of course. You even make your own door hinges, carved out of wood like some kind of 18th century wizard. The fireplace is stone, carefully mortared with a mixture of clay and ash. There's a homemade Dutch door that opens in 2 sections, because style matters, even in the wilderness. Here's the kicker. You film the entire process, set the camera on a tripod, hit the timer, then hustle into frame to show yourself sawing, hauling, carving, then hustle back to rewind the film and start again. It's exhausting. But the camera becomes more than a tool. It becomes your witness. You're only one. And somehow, day by day, it all comes together. The cabin isn't huge, maybe 11 by 14 feet, but it's solid, it's warm, and it's yours. Every notch, every chisel mark, every creak in the floor is your signature. Meanwhile, the world keeps turning without you. Men walk on the moon. Wars flare up and fade, presidents come and go, and none of it touches you. Out here, the big news is whether that squirrel finally figures out how to get into your food cache. So why would anyone choose this? That's the big question, isn't it? Some say Dick was escaping people. Others say he was seeking clarity, some monk-like purity. But here's a fringe idea. Maybe he wasn't escaping anything. Maybe he was just running toward something. Toward silence. Toward peace. Toward a way of living that felt unfiltered. There's an open debate among historians and nature writers about whether Dick's life was a statement or an experiment. Was he trying to prove a point, or just trying to live a life he wouldn't regret? As the first summer draws to a close, the nights get colder. You build a woodpile the size of a compact car. You sew heavy curtains to hold the warmth. You line the inside of the cabin with spruce boughs for insulation, and that sharp, clean pine scent. You stock your shelves with jars of lentils, dried fruit, powdered milk. You check your rifle, just in case. Then winter comes like a shutting door. The lake freezes, the snow stacks up, the sky turns gunmetal grey. You sip hot tea from a tin cup and stare out the window. This is it. Welcome to the wilderness. You wake up before the sun, not because of some romantic early riser impulse, but because the cold has found its way through your blankets and into your spine. It's still dark out, but that strange bluish Arctic twilight is starting to leak through the frost-covered window. You rub your eyes, swing your legs off the cot, and step directly into a pair of cold, stiff boots. No laces. You can't be bothered this early. You throw another log into the stove, listening to the satisfying whoosh as the flame catches, crackles, and starts pushing warmth back into the air. This is where the novelty starts to fade, and the rhythm begins. The cabin isn't just a place you built. It's now your organism, your whole ecosystem. It breathes when the wind pushes through the seams. It groans when the temperature drops. Every creak of wood tells you something, and this morning, it tells you that the storm in the night left 2 new inches of snow on the roof. You pull on your heavy coat, slap on a fur-lined cap that smells faintly of wood smoke, and step outside. The chill hits your face like a slap from the void. That kind of cold doesn't feel like weather. It feels personal. But the sky is clear, and above you, the jagged peaks of the Aleutian Range are glowing pink with morning light. It's absurdly beautiful, like a screensaver made real. You stand there a moment, just breathing it in, watching the vapour leave your mouth like little ghosts. It's hard to picture now, but once upon a time you were just a kid growing up in Iowa. Born in 1916, back when most people still used horses to get around, your parents were farmers, practical people. You learned early on how to use your hands, fix things, build things, get things done without needing a manual or an audience. That kind of mindset sticks with you, even decades later, when you're alone in the Alaskan wilderness, carving a spoon by firelight. During World War II, you served as a Navy carpenter. There were long days at sea, hard work, and not a lot of room for complaining. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught you a certain rhythm: problem, solution, repeat. After the war, you bounced around, mechanic work in Oregon, cattle ranches, a bit of adventuring. Then you picked up work with the National Park Service. That gig took you north, way north. Alaska in the 50s wasn't the cruise ship and souvenir shop version. It was vast, brutal, and almost entirely empty. And something about that emptiness called to you. Not in a dramatic way. You weren't the tortured soul type. More like, you liked things simple. The less noise, the better. By the early 60s, you'd already made a few trips into the wild. You'd helped build a cabin at Twin Lakes for a friend named Spike, a bush pilot and fellow loner. Every time you came out here, it felt more like home than the world you left behind. But one trip in 1967 sealed the deal. That was when you knew, the next time, you weren't coming back. You didn't tell many people. You weren't trying to make a scene. You just started getting your gear in order, thinking through the tools you'd need. Not the convenient stuff. No generators, no engines. Just steel tools. Saws, chisels, an axe, a hammer, and your own strength. You had to trust your hands, because out here, hands are everything. By May 1968, you were on the float plane again, flying over an endless sea of trees and ice. When you landed at Twin Lakes that spring, you knew this time it was permanent. You weren't just visiting the wild, you were becoming part of it. Now here you are, months into it, alone, Not lonely, just alone. There's a difference. You hike out to check your food cache. It's a raised platform made of logs, built to keep the bears out. Inside, there are sacks of flour, sugar, powdered milk, lentils, rice. Nothing glamorous. You ration carefully, knowing that the next supply drop could be months away, if it even comes. Everything you consume, you carry in or make yourself. You know exactly what's in your bread because you ground the grain. You don't need a label to tell you. After breakfast, oatmeal again with a few wild blueberries, you pick up your journal. Every day you log the weather, temperature, wind speed, cloud formations. You even track the animals. There's a particular fox that keeps circling the cabin, leaving prints in the snow. You start giving him a name, Charlie. He's your first unofficial neighbour. The day's work is never glamorous, but it's always essential. Chop wood, melt snow for water, inspect the cabin for drafts, check the snares you've set along the tree line. You're not a big meat eater, but protein is protein, and when a rabbit turns up, it's a small victory. You thank it silently before cleaning it out here. You learn to respect every bite. There's something deeply strange about living without mirrors. Sure, there's a scrap of polished metal tacked up near your bedroll, but mostly you don't see your own face. And slowly, your idea of yourself starts to shift. You're not Dick, not a mechanic or a vet or a guy with a social security number. You're just a being in the forest breathing, moving, surviving, and that changes things. Your senses sharpen. You start noticing the way snow clumps on different kinds of branches. You can hear the difference between the creak of a tree under wind pressure and the thump of something walking across the snow. You know when it's about to storm just by the way the light dims in the afternoon. But this isn't paradise. It's harsh, and you feel it in your bones. That cold that never really leaves your joints. The relentless quiet that sometimes gets inside your head, like an echo you can't turn off. Once, you stub your toe badly on a frozen root and think, if it's broken, that's it. There's no help coming. The wilderness doesn't care. There's no safety net here. You mess up, you pay in full. Still, there's a kind of peace in that. A pure cause and effect. If you don't chop wood, you freeze. If you leave food out, the animals get it. If you don't repair the roof before the storm, you get soaked. It's honest. Brutally honest. And slowly that honesty starts to reshape your thoughts. The noise of the world, the ads, the news, the pressure to perform starts to feel like a distant dream. Out here, the rules are old and fair. Build shelter, find food, stay warm, watch the stars. There's one night where the aurora borealis lights up the entire lake. Green fire dances across the sky, rippling like it's alive. You step outside in your boots and long johns, breath frozen in the air, and just stare. The camera is inside, you don't bother with it. Some things aren't meant to be recorded, they're just meant to happen. Later, back inside, you sit by the stove eating another bowl of beans, and think about how far you've come from the world. Not just in miles in everything. You've peeled off layers of identity like bark from a tree. You're not performing anymore, you're just living. That, maybe, is the whole point. The lake is still frozen this morning, its surface glassy and white under a thin dusting of snow. You sit on a log near the shore, steaming mug in hand, watching the sun peek over the ridgeline. The stillness is so total that even your breath seems too loud. Every now and then, you catch yourself whispering to no one, not out of loneliness, but out of respect, like you're afraid to break the spell of this place. Twin Lakes is beautiful, yes, but it also feels sacred, untouched. And somehow, you know it has accepted you. Not because it wants to, but because you've earned it. You think back to when you first laid eyes on this place nearly a year before you built the cabin. It was midsummer, and you were scouting for something. You didn't even know what exactly. You flew in with Spike, your old bush pilot friend, and the second the plane banked low over the two lakes nestled like twin mirrors in the valley, you felt something shift in your gut. Like this place wasn't just pretty. It was yours. Not in a landowner way. In a soul-level way. So you explored. Walked the shorelines. Listened to the wind pushing through the spruce. You marked a spot on the upper lake where the trees thinned and the mountain shadows fell long and cool. That would be it. You could picture it even then. A small log cabin, a stone hearth, maybe a path down to the water. The simplicity of the vision made your chest ache in a way you didn't fully understand at the time. When you left that trip, it wasn't goodbye. It was more like pressing pause. You went back to civilization, Anchorage, then to Oregon for a while, but the image of Twin Lakes clung to you like pine pitch. You tried to explain it to a few people, friends and acquaintances. Most just raised their eyebrows and nodded politely. The idea of ditching everything to live in the wild sounded romantic to them, until they pictured doing it without electricity, without grocery stores, without company. But you weren't trying to be romantic, you were trying to be real. So you made plans, quietly, methodically. You gathered tools, quality stuff, built to last. You prepped your gear, film reels, journals, utensils, knives, saws. Everything had to be useful, nothing extra. You trained your body too, lots of walking, climbing, working long hours in the shop. You knew Alaska didn't care about your intentions, it only respected endurance. By the time you returned to Twin Lakes in May 1968, you were ready. The float plane dropped you off with your gear and a tight handshake. You waved the pilot off, watched the plane lift into the sky, and for a moment you stood there on the shore, completely alone. It wasn't fear you felt, it wasn't joy either, it was more like deep gravity. The understanding that this was no longer a plan, this was your life now. Your first order of business was survival. You stayed in Spike's old cabin, just a temporary shelter. It had seen better days, drafts, rotted beams, a door that creaked like a ghost with sore knees, but it kept you out of the elements while you got to work. You began scouting for the best trees. They had to be just right, straight, healthy, mature spruce, not too dry, not too green. You marked each one, then felled them by hand, each cut a rhythmic, deliberate motion. Then you debarked the logs, not with some industrial peeler but with your draw knife. It took forever, and your arms felt like they were full of wet cement, but there was a rhythm to it. One log at a time, one day at a time. By late June, you had your cabin site cleared and the first foundation logs ready. And here's where things got real, because every single piece of that cabin you crafted with your own hands, no kits, no cheat codes, no YouTube tutorials. You carved notches, scribed joints, measured by eye. You used a homemade plumb bob to keep your corners square, and somehow, it worked. You filmed it all. That old 16mm camera became your quiet companion. You'd set it on a tripod, hit the timer, then hustle into the frame, pretending like no big deal, just casually lifting a 100-pound log by yourself. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You just wanted to document, to leave proof that this was possible, and man, the attention to detail. It wasn't just a cabin, it was a sculpture of function. You made your own hinges out of wood, your own doorknob. Even the window shutters had little carved latches. You didn't believe in wasting materials, so every scrap found a second life. The shavings from your draw knife became kindling. Bent nails were straightened and reused. You even created a makeshift fridge, essentially a pit filled with gravel near the lake where the temperature stayed just above freezing. But here's the fringe bit, the quirky, almost mystical part. You didn't name your cabin. Most people would have. Called it something poetic like Moose Haven or Solitude Lodge. But not you. You just called it the cabin. Because out here things didn't need names, they just were. And as you built it, you started to realise this wasn't just a physical task. It was a spiritual one. Every cut, every nail, every drop of sweat soaked into those logs was like carving your name into the earth. Not for others to see, but for the land to remember. There's a debate among wilderness historians about what exactly this act represented. Was it rebellion? A middle finger to modernity? Or was it some kind of pilgrimage? A journey into deeper awareness? Some say Dick Proenneke was a recluse. Others say he was a pioneer philosopher. You don't worry about labels. You're too busy sanding a window frame with a scrap of hide. By late summer, the roof was on, the fireplace was laid, and the cabin smelled like a mix of fresh pine and effort. Your hands were calloused, your beard was wild, and your soul felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe older. The work wasn't done, not even close, but the structure stood. It was yours. And when the wind howled across the lake that night, you listened from inside your walls and felt something you hadn't felt in years. Belonging. There's a silence here that doesn't exist anywhere else. Not emptiness. Something more textured. It's a silence filled with the sound of wind brushing spruce needles, the distant splash of a fish surfacing, the creak of snow shifting on the roof, and in that silence you start to feel the layers of modern life peel away. The worries about time, gone, the ego, fading. Even your memories of the world start to feel like stories someone else told you. All that matters now is the rhythm. Wake, work, eat, watch the sky, sleep. That night, As the fire crackles and the stars bloom above the ridgeline, you sit on your little wooden chair, cup in hand, and feel a calm so deep it almost makes you laugh. You did it, you're here, and you're not going anywhere. It's late September now, and you can feel the season turning like a slow breath being exhaled through the valley. The wind cuts a little sharper each morning. The lake, once lively with reflections and fish, is starting to stiffen around the edges, glassing over with a thin sheen of ice. Birds are vanishing in waves, heading south in V formations while you stay put, very much not flying anywhere. Everything in the wild knows what's coming, and now so do you. The cabin is nearly finished. A few tweaks here and there, a better seal around the door, maybe more chinking between the logs to block the wind. You've become obsessed with insulation. You walk around the place with a candle to spot drafts, watching the flame flicker in betrayal wherever the cold sneaks in. It's a game you're determined to win because out here, heat is currency and winter is the taxman. You look around and realise just how much has changed since you first stepped off the plane. Your hands are stronger, your face is roughened by sun and wind, and your boots are worn into the shape of your own stubborn persistence. The cabin feels less like a project now and more like a companion. Weather-beaten and imperfect, but loyal. It's the kind of place you'll talk to when the nights get long, and make no mistake, the nights are about to get very long. Today you're doing something most people haven't done in generations. Cutting firewood for survival, not ambience, not backyard fire pit stuff. Real firewood, hundreds of logs, split and stacked with almost religious attention. You build multiple wood piles, one near the cabin, one near the outhouse, one just for emergencies. You start to view each split log as a lifeline. Every time you sink the axe into a round of spruce, there's a satisfaction so deep it's almost primal. The heat from chopping is immediate. It surges through your body, burns in your shoulders, radiates through your gloves. But it fades fast, and when you pause, you feel the cold creep back in like a thief. That's the rhythm now: swing, sweat, pause, shiver, repeat. While you work, the sky darkens. Not with clouds, but with that early twilight that belongs only to the far north. You glance at your wrist, then realise you haven't worn a watch in weeks. Time's gone elastic out here. You wake when the sky lightens. You eat when you're hungry. You sleep when your eyelids stop cooperating. The clock might as well be a myth. Inside the cabin, things are cosy in the way only hard-earned warmth can be. You've got shelves carved from leftover planks, stocked with jars of lentils, beans, rice, powdered milk, some dried apples from back home, a few precious tins of coffee. You've also got your sourdough starter going in a clay pot. An old trick you learned from another homesteader. The bubbling, yeasty smell of it makes the cabin feel alive, almost civilized. You knead the dough by hand, using your makeshift countertop, a flat, sanded log you've planed smooth over the past few weeks. Once it's shaped, you place it near the stove to rise. Baking bread in a cast-iron pot isn't exactly effortless, but you've got nothing but time and an unsettling amount of focus. The first time you get it right, the smell alone almost brings you to tears. That loaf becomes a sacred object. You don't just eat it, you commune with it. A thick slice, warm from the stove, smeared with a little lard and dusted with salt, tastes like a reward for surviving. You chew slowly. It's the opposite of fast food. You made this. You earned this. And here's a fun fringe fact. You rig up your own fridge by digging a pit near the shoreline and filling it with gravel. The water table keeps the temperature low enough to preserve perishables. It's not exactly FDA approved, but it works. And in this remote corner of Alaska, that's enough. Outside, you hang your pot from a tripod made of branches lashed together with rawhide cord. You boil snow for water. You stir stew made of beans, squirrel meat, and whatever wild herbs you've learned to identify. The first time you use something that isn't from a package, a little wild onion or fireweed, you feel like a wizard unlocking secret knowledge. It's not just food, it's place you're eating, the land becoming part of you. The idea of hunger shifts too. Back in civilization, hunger was an inconvenience. Out here it's a motivator. It makes food taste better, it makes routine sacred, and every calorie is hard won. Some nights, as the wind howls outside, you lay in your cot and listen to the sounds of the cabin, the snap of the fire, the groan of timbers settling. You imagine them talking to each other in some ancient log language. You wonder if this is what it feels like to live inside your own heartbeat. And then there are the dreams. Something about the silence out here shifts your subconscious. You don't dream about the office or the news or traffic jams. You dream of animals, of cold rivers, of walking without a destination. Sometimes you dream in colours that don't exist anywhere but in the sky above Twin Lakes other times. You dream about the people you've left behind, family, friends, voices from a world that feels more like memory than reality now. You write everything down. That's become another ritual. You keep a meticulous journal, recording not just weather patterns and wildlife sightings, but thoughts, deep ones, weird ones, occasionally hilarious ones. You read old entries and laugh at how green you sounded back in June, like a kid trying to impress nature with good manners. There's an ongoing debate about whether your journal was ever meant for anyone else. Some scholars say you wrote it as a personal compass. Others think you always knew someone might read it, that it was a kind of message in a bottle. Maybe they're both right. Maybe all writing is a kind of reaching. The isolation sharpens your focus in unexpected ways. You begin noticing things you would have missed in the noise of normal life. The subtle difference between spruce and hemlock bark, the direction birds land when the wind is shifting, the way your own breathing syncs with the lake when you sit still long enough. One morning, while gathering firewood, you stumble on a perfect set of fox tracks in the snow. They zigzag near the cabin, loop toward the lake, then vanish into the underbrush. You crouch down, studying them, imagining the little paws moving silently while you slept. You feel a strange kinship with that fox. Both of you, wandering out here on your own terms. You don't speak much anymore, at least not out loud. Maybe a muttered hell when you stub your toe or drop a kettle, but mostly your voice stays tucked inside. You realise how much of your old life was made of filler noise, words for the sake of hearing them. Out here, silence isn't empty, it's complete. So, no, this isn't a vacation. It's not a cleanse or a challenge or some primal man versus nature showdown. It's just life. Stripped of the extras, brutal sometimes, beautiful often, honest always. You're not sure how long you'll stay, maybe a year, maybe more, maybe forever. That's not the point. You're not counting days, you're collecting moments. The crackle of firewood, the hiss of snow under your boots, the first loaf of bread that doesn't come out like a brick. This is your world now, and it fits. The sun doesn't rise so much as it just sort of slides sideways now. In early October it barely clears the mountains before it starts sinking again. The daylight is thin, pale, and always seems to be leaving. But when it lands across the surface of Twin Lakes, even for a few fleeting hours, it hits like gold on glass. That soft light drapes across your cabin like a spotlight on a stage no one else is watching. Not that you'd want an audience. This place isn't for performance, this place is for being. You've earned this silence. And now that the structure's complete and the firewood is stacked and the sourdough's rising like a well-behaved child, you take a morning just to look. You step outside with a mug of coffee, black, no cream, not by choice, and wander out toward the lake. Your breath fogs in front of you in cartoonish little clouds, and every crunch of your boot on the frost-covered ground feels like a drum beat in a quiet song. From this spot, your cabin looks like it belongs. Not like something dropped in or forced onto the land, but like it grew there. Sprouted from the forest like one of the trees you built it to last, with hand-fitted joints and not a single nail wasted. The Dutch door swings open smooth. The roofline is clean. Even the window shutters open like a grin. You take pride in the craftsmanship, not because you're showing off, but because every detail is a little declaration. I am trying here, and trying is survival. Inside you've developed a kind of personal aesthetic. Call it frontier minimalism. There's no clutter, just the essentials. A cot, a stove, shelves, your tools, your notebooks, and a wooden chair you carved from a log that nearly broke your wrist when you moved it. You don't sit in it so much as collapse into it after a long day, and it groans in the most satisfying way. There's even a kind of art here. Not paintings, though you do sketch sometimes, but art in the details. The way you smoothed the edges of the shelf so your fingers wouldn't snag the tiny carved bear on the end of your spoon handle. The snowshoes hanging on the wall like sculpture. A bird's feather tucked into a crack above the window. Little trophies of your survival, your attention. And let's talk about that window. You positioned it just right, facing the lake and the mountains beyond. It's not big, glass is a luxury, but through it you can see the world shifting in real time. In summer, it framed wildflowers and sparkling water. Now it gives you snowdrifts and frozen silence. It's your one living painting, changing every hour, more beautiful than anything you could have bought or stolen. When the weather's clear, you go for walks. Well, expeditions might be a better word. Nothing casual out here. Even a stroll can turn into a life or death situation if the weather changes suddenly, or if a bear decides it's your turn to be watched, so you go prepared. Rifle over your shoulder, knife on your belt, matches in a tin in your coat pocket. You walk with purpose, eyes scanning, ears tuned. The way the snow crunches under your boots tells you something about its depth. The stillness in the trees warns you when something's near. You follow a set of tracks one morning. Moose, maybe. Big ones, wide stride, moving slow. You trail them up into the pines, then around the frozen creek. There's a thrill in it. Not the thrill of danger exactly. More like the electric sense that you're sharing space with something ancient and wild and bigger than you'll ever be. Eventually the tracks vanish into thicker brush, and you let them go. You're not here to chase, you're here to witness. You crouch by the creek for a moment, breaking a thin layer of ice with your glove, and drink straight from the flow. Cold, clean, and better than anything in a bottle. You fill your canteen and head back. In the evenings the cabin comes alive with warmth. You feed the stove like a pet, always just enough to keep it content, never too much. The firelight bounces off the log walls and makes everything feel golden. You read by that light sometimes. Books flown in during supply drops. Old paperbacks mostly. Jack London, Thoreau, a little Dostoevsky for when you're feeling dramatic. But you also watch the fire. A lot. Just sit and stare like it's a conversation you're part of. Flames move like thought. Quick, unpredictable, full of little decisions. You let it lull you. Burn your worries down to embers. Then, before bed, you step outside again, no matter how cold. It's a ritual now. You stand under the stars, surrounded by black trees and white snow, and just breathe. The sky in Alaska is rude, honestly. It makes you feel microscopic in the most beautiful way. Stars spill out in every direction, a Milky Way so thick it looks painted. Some nights, you see the aurora, those slow, drifting curtains of green and violet, as if the sky itself is sighing. And this is when it hits you. The absurdity of it all. You're in a hand-built log cabin, on a lake few people have even heard of, eating stew you made yourself, wearing socks you darned with a fishbone needle, watching the sky pulse like a living organism. All while the rest of the world spins on, full of coffee shops and sitcoms and mortgages. You're not above it, you're just elsewhere. There's a quirky side note here. The National Park Service has quietly started to notice you. Rangers have flown by, sometimes circling low, curious. You're technically squatting on public land, but you keep your footprint light, your attitude respectful. You're not claiming the land, you're borrowing it carefully. Some of them even admire you. One ranger called you a national treasure with an axe. But it raises a question that keeps academics mildly agitated even now. Was Dick Proenneke a renegade, a conservationist, an outlaw? He filed paperwork, sure kept in contact occasionally. But he didn't ask for permission to live deliberately. He just did it. And the land, for the most part, didn't object. You end the night writing. Your journal is filling up fast now. Page after page of tiny script. Weather notes, thoughts, sketches, observations. You press leaves between the pages, tape in feathers, scratch out poems you'll pretend you didn't mean to write. It's not polished, not meant for publication. Just a record. A way to remember that yes, this happened. You were here, you lived here. And in the quiet after the pen stops moving, you sit in the cabin's glow, listening to the wind build over the lake, wondering, maybe for the first time, if this really could be forever. If you've crossed some invisible line where going back wouldn't just be difficult, it would be wrong. Because more and more, this doesn't feel like a break from the real world. It feels like the real world finally let you in. You lose track of the exact date, but you know it's winter now. Real winter. The kind that doesn't flirt or threaten. It just is. It descends like a heavy quilt, and once it's settled, it doesn't move for months. The lake has frozen solid, thick enough to walk on without that nervous little prayer you said the first few times. Snow stacks on your cabin roof like slow-growing frosting, and the whole valley goes quiet. Really quiet, not just a lack of sound. more like the air itself is holding its breath. Your world shrinks down to a few hundred square yards. There's the cabin, the woodshed, the outhouse, the trail to the lake, and the perimeter you walk each day just to remind yourself you still can. It's a modest kingdom, but it's yours, and maintaining it has become a full-time job. You ration your firewood like a banker counting coins, split kindling in obsessive batches, and monitor the weather like a nervous farmer. Each morning the routine saves you. Wake before dawn, coax the stove back to life, thaw your water jug near the fire, eat something hot. Usually oatmeal, again, with a spoonful of honey if you're feeling wild. You sit by the window and journal while the world outside shifts from black to a gunmetal grey. The sun barely shows itself these days, and when it does, it skims the horizon like it's in a hurry to be somewhere else. You've learned that solitude doesn't mean silence. Not exactly. The cabin has its own language. It snaps and creaks as it adjusts to the cold, as if it's dreaming. The stove clicks softly when it's heating up. The wind makes the trees outside groan like old ships. Even the snow has sound, this weird muffled shush when it falls, and a high-pitched crunch when you walk on it at 20 below. Your body changes in subtle ways. Your beard is now a permanent part of your face. Your hands are cracked and stiff, and you wear gloves almost constantly. You've lost weight too, not dangerously, but noticeably. The kind of lean that comes from honest work and a strict, unavoidable diet. You've stopped craving junk food mostly, though on the really cold days you do find yourself fantasizing about pie. Just pie. There's a new awareness now. You've learned to read the world by tiny details. A soft spot in the snow might mean an animal passed through during the night. The way your breath curls inside the cabin tells you if the stove needs more fuel. Even your own heartbeat feels louder, like your body knows how alone it is, how exposed it's a strange intimacy with yourself. You're not just living in the wilderness, you're living inside your own skin in a way you never have before. Still, there are moments when the loneliness hits like a gust of wind through the cracks. You find yourself talking aloud, to your tools, to the birds outside, sometimes just to the fire. Not because you expect an answer, but because sometimes you need to hear a voice, even if it's your own. You read old letters too, ones you brought with you. Folded, worn, the handwriting of people who are now 2,000 miles and several decades away. Mail doesn't come often, but when it does, it's a full-day event. You hear the plane before you see it, a low hum echoing off the cliffs, and you sprint out like a kid at Christmas. Sometimes it's just supplies, flour, nails, film. Sometimes there's a letter or two. You stretch them out, reading them slowly, like a luxury meal. Every sentence feels precious, and you always write back, even if you know the reply won't reach them for weeks or months. You've gotten a reputation among the bush pilots who fly in supplies. They call you the guy with the camera or the hermit with manners. One of them, a younger pilot named Jay, starts bringing you little gifts, a tin of peaches once, a deck of cards. Once, incredibly, a small square of chocolate, which you eat in 4 deliberate bites, eyes closed like you're conducting a religious ritual. There's a fringe detail most people never consider, the cold warps film. That old 16mm camera you carry around like a second head. It hates the cold. The reels get brittle, the lens fogs, batteries die instantly. But you adapt. You warm the camera inside your coat. You wrap your batteries in wool socks. You plan shots meticulously so you can get it in one take. Over time, your footage becomes less documentary and more diary. Footage of snowfall, chopping wood, a moose in the distance, your breath clouding in the foreground. These tiny, quiet moments are how you tell your story now. One of your favourite shots happens by accident. You set the camera on a stump, hit record and walk into frame to check your snares. But as you kneel, the wind picks up and blows a swirl of snow through the frame, catching the light just right. You watch it later, stunned. For a second, it looks like the forest is breathing. You don't show it to anyone, not yet. But you re-watch it when the loneliness creeps in, just to remind yourself why you're here. You do have neighbours, sort of. Wildlife. Moose are frequent visitors, huge and slow-moving like prehistoric cows. You keep your distance, out of respect and self-preservation. Foxes dart through your trails, leaving tiny prints and snatching bits of leftover stew you occasionally accidentally leave out. One fox in particular starts hanging around more often. Red fur, alert eyes, a crooked tail. You name him Clyde, because he just seems like a Clyde. He watches you from a distance and you talk to him like he's your judgmental roommate. Bears are a different story. They're mostly hibernating now, but you remember the early fall when one got a little too curious and sniffed around your food cache. You shouted, waved your arms, even fired a warning shot. It ran, but not fast. More like it was bored with you. You kept your rifle close after that. The rule out here is simple. Respect everything bigger than you and assume everything smaller is trying to eat your food. Nightfall comes fast now. By 4 p.m, you're lighting the lantern. It casts a soft orange glow across the cabin, and you move slower in the evenings, like your whole body is syncing with the darkness. Dinner is always something simple. Stew or beans or a bit of bread if your starter cooperates. Sometimes you get fancy and fry a bit of fish you caught and preserved weeks ago. You eat slowly, like it matters. Before bed, you sit by the fire and write. You sketch too. Trees mostly, or birds, or just little scenes from the day. The drawings aren't great, but they feel honest. You include the weird stuff too. The dream you had about a vending machine in the woods, or how the icicles hanging from the eaves look like frozen shark teeth. You write it all down. Not because you think anyone will read it, but because if you don't, the silence will fill that space instead. You fall asleep early, usually with your hand still on the journal. The fire dies down, the wind picks up, the cold presses in around the cabin like a whisper, and just before you drift off, you realise something strange. You haven't heard another human voice in weeks, and you're okay with that. One morning you wake to a sound that doesn't belong, the crunch of snow under something heavy, not the wind, not a tree shedding ice, something walking. You sit up in the cold, blinking hard, your breath visible in the dark, and reach instinctively for the rifle you keep propped by the cot. You hold your breath and listen. Crunch, pause, crunch again. Slow, deliberate steps. Could be moose, could be bear, or if you're incredibly unlucky, it could be human, which honestly feels more dangerous. You slide out of bed, slipping your boots on with numb fingers, and step quietly toward the door. You crack it open and peek outside. The air is sharp enough to make your nose ache, but you ignore it. The snow is falling lightly, and through the haze you see it, a massive shape moving across the tree line, dark against the pale landscape. A moose, definitely. A bull, judging by the antlers. You relax a little, just a little, but keep watching. He's beautiful in the kind of way that doesn't try to be. Tall, awkward, all long legs and too much neck, but regal somehow. He moves slow, steam billowing from his nostrils, every muscle like a coiled spring. You stay still, not daring to move, just watching this prehistoric creature ghost past your cabin like you're not even there. This isn't the first time you've shared your space with animals. They don't knock, they don't ask, but they're always there, patrolling the edges of your little kingdom. They teach you the real rules of this place, unspoken, ancient. You're not in charge. You're just one heartbeat in a larger rhythm. The moose passes without incident, leaving behind a trail of prints and an unsettling reminder. You're never truly alone, not here. And whether it's moose, fox, or something with claws and a bad attitude, you've learned to live by a few very firm rules. Rule 1, don't keep food in the cabin. Smells cling. You've got a bear-proof cache now, built up on poles and reinforced with wire. It's not perfect, but it's enough to make a hungry predator think twice. You learned that the hard way back in early fall when a black bear wandered too close and pawed at your cabin walls like a drunk knocking at the wrong door. You scared it off, barely, but your heart didn't stop racing for hours. Rule 2, always carry something sharp. Knife, axe, doesn't matter. Tools out here do double duty. Build with them, defend with them, talk to them when you're losing your grip a little. You've got a favourite knife now, one you keep honed like your sanity depends on it. In some ways, maybe it does. Rule 3, do not get cocky. That's when the wilderness notices. You get too confident, it humbles you. Forget to respect the cold and it'll freeze your fingers solid before you can apologise. You trip, break a bone, you're done. No safety net. Just nature, watching silently while you learn, or you don't. Still, your encounters with the wild aren't always terrifying. Sometimes they're downright charming. There's a squirrel who's taken up residence near the outhouse. You named him Rupert. He's bold, loud, and frankly judgmental, always chirping at you like you violated some unwritten rodent law. You started leaving him crumbs, tiny offerings, mostly to appease his wrath. He's your closest neighbour now, and weirdly, you feel guilty when you don't see him for a day. There's a quiet companionship in these relationships. You don't try to tame or control, you just observe, learn their routines. You know where the fox likes to hunt in the early morning. You can tell when the snowshoe hares are about to molt into their white winter coats. You see the signs, claw marks on trees, fur caught in the bark, the slow change in the bird songs as migration thins the skies, and once in a while you see something magical. One evening you're standing by the lake watching the light fade when a lynx appears. Silent, like a shadow, given shape you freeze, hardly daring to breathe. It's so close you can see the twitch of its whiskers, the way its huge paws leave barely a dent in the snow. Then it looks at you, really looks, and for a second, you feel like it sees through you. Then, just as quickly, it's gone, melting into the woods like it was never there. You write about it in your journal that night, trying to capture the moment, but the words fall short. How do you explain that kind of stillness? That feeling of being a part of something older than time? There's an open debate among wildlife experts about how much animals know about humans like you. Are they curious? Do they remember you? Or are you just another shape that occasionally makes noise? Some argue that long-term solo exposure to wildlife changes a person's brain, makes them more attuned, more sensitive. You're not sure, but you do feel changed. You find yourself moving slower, listening more, reacting less. Your body is leaner now, your senses sharper. You can smell snow in the air before it falls. You can tell the time by the shadows on the trees. You can walk across frozen ground without a sound. And despite the risks, and there are plenty, you feel more alive here than you ever did in the so-called real world. Because out here, every movement matters, every choice has weight. You don't scroll past danger, you prepare for it. You don't waste food or water or daylight. Everything is precious and nothing is guaranteed. Of course, there are odd moments. Once you're chopping wood and you swear you see something in the woods. A figure maybe, human-shaped. But when you call out, there's no reply. Just trees and the echo of your own voice. You chalk it up to a trick of the light, or maybe your imagination stretching its legs. But you can't deny it leaves a chill behind that even the fire can't quite chase off. Another time you find strange tracks near the cabin. Not bear, not moose, not fox. Something different. Wider spacing. Odd pattern. You sketch them in your journal and note the direction. You never figure out what made them. And honestly, part of you doesn't want to. The wilderness doesn't always offer answers. Sometimes it just offers the question and leaves you alone with it. At night, you fall asleep to the sounds of it all. The wind against the cabin, the rustle of branches, the occasional hoot of an owl. And underneath that, the sound of your own breath. Steady, quiet, real. You're not just surviving now, you're becoming something else entirely. You've stopped measuring days by the calendar now. Instead, you measure by the sky, by the colour of the light, by the thickness of the ice on the lake, by how long it takes for your coffee to freeze if you set it down outside. That's how you know winter has truly settled in. The kind of winter that doesn't just test your patience, it tests your very definition of what it means to exist. There's no rushing this season, no fast-forward button. You learn to live at the speed of snow. The sun barely shows up anymore. When it does, it's low and orange and hangs there like an apology. The days are short, the nights are endless, and the cold is not just a temperature, it's a personality. It gets into your joints, creeps into your thoughts, waits for you to slip up. You do everything slowly now, with intention. Every movement is calculated. How to keep your water from freezing, how to keep the stove burning through the night, how to walk across the cabin floor without stepping barefoot onto ice-cold boards and immediately regretting your life choices. You stop using your alarm. You wake up when the cabin stops being warm. The fire, though loyal, never lasts until morning. So you get up in the dark, light the lamp, and shuffle to the stove. You stack kindling with cold, clumsy fingers and strike the match like it's a magic spell. The flame catches, the stove sighs, and slowly warmth returns, first to the room, then to your bones. This is the time of year when most people would have cracked, and you get it. The silence is oppressive, the light is scarce, the repetition is relentless. You know folks who've done this sort of thing and didn't last a month. Solitude starts out poetic, but quickly turns clinical if you don't keep your mind sharp. So you build systems, rituals. Your mornings are sacred. Coffee, journal, weather notes. You log everything. Temperature, wind direction, snow depth. You track it like you're preparing for some great scientific revelation. And maybe you are. Not for the world, for yourself. Patterns bring comfort. Data is its own kind of religion out here. And the weather? You've become fluent in it. You can read clouds like a second language. A certain low ceiling tells you there's a storm coming. A weird hush in the woods means the snow's about to start. Ice crystals on the window before dawn mean it dipped below -30 again. You write it all down, because out here, details are currency, and knowing what's coming might save your life, or at least your toes. The cold affects everything. Bread dough refuses to rise, lantern oil thickens, even your handwriting changes, stiffer, shakier, slower. You start to insulate your ink bottles by keeping them tucked under your coat during the day. There's a brief moment every morning when you debate whether washing your face is worth the sting of cold water. Most days the answer is no. And let's talk about the outhouse. Ah yes, the bitter little ritual. It's about 50 feet from the cabin, a walk that feels like a polar expedition at 3 a.m. You wait until you absolutely have to go. Then you wrap yourself in every layer you can find, grab a flashlight, and make the trek. The stars above are so bright they feel like pinpricks in your brain. The snow squeaks underfoot. Your breath fogs the beam of the flashlight. You mutter curses into the night as you fumble with frozen buttons and sit on what might be the coldest surface known to mankind. You do your business quickly, whispering apologies to your own backside, then race back inside, vowing to never eat beans again. You keep a tally in your journal of how many times you've considered digging a second outhouse inside the cabin. So far, the tally is up to 14. Still, even with all the discomfort, there are moments, small, strange miracles that you only get to witness because you've committed to this insane, frozen way of life. One morning, while fetching water, you see the lake under a fresh crust of ice. Perfect, clear, and glassy. The mountains are reflected so perfectly that it looks like the world has folded in half. You pause and walk out onto it, carefully. You can see straight down through the ice, the cracks branching like frozen lightning. It's terrifying and gorgeous and entirely silent. You've learned how to make peace with that silence. It no longer feels like something pressing in on you. Now it feels like a blanket, thick, heavy, comforting, in a weird, slightly unsettling way. You find yourself whispering even when no one's around. Not out of fear, just because loud voices don't belong here. They bounce too hard, come back too fast. Books are still a lifeline. You read slowly like you're rationing them. A few pages at a time, then you set it down and just think about it. Sometimes you write down your own endings. Sometimes you rewrite whole chapters just because you disagree with the author. Solitude has made you cocky, and sometimes you don't read at all. You sit with your thoughts, let them rise and fall like the flames in the stove. Some are strange, daydreams, half-memories, odd little loops that play in your head. Others are sharp, focused, sobering. You think about your past a lot, your brothers, your time in the Navy, the people you used to work with, faces from old lives. Some you miss, others you're grateful to forget. There's a certain freedom in knowing no one can interrupt you. You are the only voice in your head. There's no TV, no radio, no headlines shouting at you, just you. The quiet and the cold. You start carving again, not for function, just for the pleasure of it. You whittle spoons, little animal figures, a perfect miniature of your cabin. You lose hours to it, sitting by the fire, the shavings falling like dry snow into your lap. You never thought of yourself as an artist, but now, maybe you are. Once, while carving a wooden loon, you look up and see the real thing, out on the ice, wings tucked, just there, like it's come to judge your craftsmanship. You both lock eyes. It tilts its head. You show it the carving. It blinks, unimpressed, and waddles away. Fair. And then, every now and then, you get a visitor. Not human. Better. A pine marten. Sleek. Clever. Twitchy. It starts showing up near the woodshed, sniffing for mice. You don't feed it, on principle, but you do start talking to it. It watches you with those dark eyes, like it's considering whether you're worth knowing. You name it Sebastian, because if you're going to descend into a kind of frozen madness, you might as well bring the wildlife with you. Scholars have often debated whether long-term isolation in extreme climates causes cognitive shifts. heightened focus, hallucinations, or even spiritual awakenings. You're not sure where you fall on that spectrum. All you know is that your inner voice is louder now, and strangely kinder. You don't beat yourself up as much. You mess up, you laugh, you spill soup, you shrug. There's no one to impress, no one to scold you. Just the cabin, the cold, the stars. The days are short, the nights are long, but you're still here. And somehow, you're thriving. You're beginning to forget what month it is. December, January, could be February for all you know. The days bleed together, stitched only by meals, journal entries, and the slow rotation of stars overhead. There's something oddly liberating about this kind of temporal amnesia. Time here isn't a clock, it's a mood. You wake up in darkness, move through more darkness, and fall asleep surrounded by it. The sun makes brief appearances, rolling lazily along the edge of the world like it's not really interested in showing up anymore. And yet this strange rhythm becomes a comfort. There's nothing to keep up with. No meetings, no deadlines, no holidays sneaking up on you with guilt-wrapped expectations. Just you, the cabin, and the small circle of earth you've carved into livable territory. You're not surviving the winter now. You're wearing it like a coat, heavy, rough, but oddly warm. You've started filming more again. Not the big scenes. No grand sweeping landscapes or time-lapses of mountains changing colour. That's summer stuff. Now it's the quiet moments. A pine cone half buried in snow, steam curling from your cup of tea, the way your boots leave dark impressions in untouched powder. These little shots become your way of saying, yes, this happened. I saw it. I was here. There's something about pointing a camera at a moment that makes it more real, more deliberate. You don't do retakes. If your hand shakes, it stays. If your beard's frozen and you look like a disgruntled frost troll, that's what the lens gets. You don't bother with vanity out here. The camera's not for an audience, it's for memory. A future version of you that might not believe you actually did this. One day you film yourself chopping wood. Simple stuff. You set the tripod, check the light, then step back into frame. Axe lifted, log centered. You split it clean down the middle. Crack. The sound echoes across the frozen lake, sharp and satisfying. You watch the playback later and realise something strange. You don't look tired. You look calm, centred, like someone who has finally stopped running. That kind of calm is earned. You've spent months now with no noise but your own thoughts and the howl of the wind. At first, that was terrifying, all that inner chatter, unfiltered and uninvited, but over time, it softened, got quieter. Now, when you sit by the fire at night, you find yourself smiling at thoughts that used to scare you. Regrets, old failures, things you left unsaid. They still visit, but they don't linger. You nod at them like old friends who've dropped by to make peace. You wonder if this is what people used to mean when they talked about finding themselves. Though let's be honest, if you had known that finding yourself involved frozen socks and using a stick to break the ice off your outhouse seat, you might have passed. Still, there's no denying that something inside you has changed. The man who arrived here with crates of gear and a head full of plans has been slowly carved away by the wind, the cold, and the silence. What's left feels simpler, more elemental. You realise you've developed a new relationship with failure. Out here, you mess up constantly. You drop things, miscalculate, burn the rice trip in a snowdrift and spend 5 minutes trying to dig out your mitten while swearing like a frontier pirate. But there's no shame in it. No one's watching. And because of that, you've learned to laugh at yourself more than you ever did in the world of people. Like the time you built what you were sure would be a genius collapsible table, only for it to collapse permanently the first time you put a kettle on it, or when you tried to make soap using rendered fat and a vague memory of something you read in a book once, only to end up with a grey, lumpy brick that smelled like despair. You keep the soap brick, by the way, as a warning, and also because it makes you laugh every time you look at it. You also laugh at the fox, Clyde, who has apparently decided that your porch is his porch. He leaves tracks across the front steps every morning now, and you're half convinced he's trying to establish dominance one day. You catch him staring in through the window. Just staring. Like a little judge in a fur coat. You raise your cup to him. He vanishes. Probably off to write a strongly worded letter. And then there are the dreams. Winter dreams are different. They feel deeper, heavier. Sometimes you dream of heat. Sun-warmed fields, summer rain, the smell of cut grass. Sometimes it's people. Your father, long gone, a friend you haven't spoken to in 20 years. They don't say anything. They just sit with you in the cabin as if they've always been there. One night, you dream of a supermarket. Just aisles and aisles of food, fluorescent lights buzzing, some kids screaming about cereal. You wake up sweating and confused. Not because you miss it, but because it all seems so alien now. So noisy, so bright. The thought of being surrounded by people, boxed into traffic, bombarded by signs and music and constant opinions, it makes your stomach twist. You realise you've become a different kind of person. Not a hermit, not quite. You still talk to people when the mail plane lands, still write letters, still think about the outside world. But it doesn't feel like home anymore. This cabin does. The fire, the lake, the wind tapping on the window. It's all yours now. There's a quirky moment that sticks with you. You're sitting at the small table, writing, when a mouse scampers across the floor, pauses near your boot, and just stares up at you. You both freeze. It blinks. You blink. Then it vanishes under the floorboards like a magician. You scribble the event in your journal, wondering if you should be worried, but mostly just amused. Later that week you find tiny gnaw marks on your rice sack. You set a trap, humane of course, and when you catch the little guy, you carry him out to the edge of the woods and let him go with a stern lecture about boundaries you imagine him reporting back to Clyde. As the days grow colder and the sky grows darker, you begin to feel like you're slipping into something timeless. Like you've stepped sideways out of the flow of modern life into a parallel reality where clocks don't matter and the only deadline is whether or not you can get the firewood stacked before the next snowstorm. You've started to believe that there's a kind of truth out here, something quiet and enduring that hums just below the surface of things. You can't explain it, but you feel it in your bones when you sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and watch the mountains shift colour as the sun drags itself across the sky. There's a debate among philosophers about whether solitude reveals your true self, or just strips away your distractions until you become something else entirely. You're not sure. Maybe both are true. Maybe you've stopped being who you were because that version of you only made sense in a world of cities and calendars. Now you're something new, something colder, quieter, a little more wild. And in the heart of this frozen silence you realise you like who you're becoming. The mail plane comes once every few months now, a distant rumble in the sky that snaps you out of whatever you're doing, chopping wood, mending socks, writing in your journal, and draws you outside like a moth to an engine. It's the only machine you see for weeks at a time, the only sign that the outside world still spins, still exists, still remembers you're here. You stand by the lake as the float plane approaches, its skis fitted for snow now, slicing across the icy surface in a slow, deliberate landing that kicks up white powder like a whisper of summer. The pilot steps out, bundled like a burrito in wool and leather, grinning under a wind-chapped face. You shake hands. Firm, quick, no fuss. He hands over a canvas bag marked with your name in smudged ink and asks how you're doing. You always say the same thing. Still breathing. He laughs, makes a joke about checking for frostbite, and you both know he can't stay long. Weather changes fast up here, and the mountains are greedy with fog. He'll be gone before the sun's moved an inch. Inside the mail sack are your treasures. Flour, oats, new socks, film reels, coffee. But best of all are the letters. Thick envelopes, handwritten, still warm from whatever pocket they rode in. You don't tear into them right away. No. That would be like chugging a fine bottle of wine after months of boiled creek water. You save them. Stack them neatly, make coffee, light the lamp. And when everything's quiet and the stove is purring, you sit down and read each one like it's the last thing you'll ever hear from another human being. Some are from friends, a few from family. Occasionally there's one from someone you barely remember. An old co-worker, a neighbour's kid who saw the documentary footage someone edited together from your films. Every letter feels like a little thread connecting you to a distant buzzing web of life you chose to step away from. Not because you hated it, but because it never fit quite right. You write back slowly, carefully. Your handwriting's gotten a little shakier in the cold, but your thoughts are clearer now. You don't just update people on the weather or the woodpile, you share. You tell them about Clyde the fox, about the frost that paints your windows every morning, about the dream you had last week of a city made entirely of trees. You ask questions. even though you know the answers won't come for months. It's a strange kind of conversation, delayed, fragmented, but real. You wonder if they picture you when they read your words. Do they imagine you hunched over a log table, ink freezing in the pen, lantern light flickering across your face? Or do they just see the myth? The lone man in the wilderness, beard full of snow, part mountain goat, part philosopher. You're not sure which is more accurate. There's a fringe idea you once read about, how time in isolation moves differently. Not slower, necessarily, but deeper. Like every moment presses into you more fully, you believe it now. Every letter you receive feels more potent than an entire week of casual conversation back in the world. The words carry weight. Emotion doesn't get diluted by small talk or traffic updates. It just arrives, raw and unfiltered. Some days you miss the sound of a voice, not conversation, just a voice. You try talking aloud more often now, not to yourself exactly, but to the cabin, to the trees, to Clyde when he shows up and stares at you with those judgmental eyes. You narrate your chores sometimes, like you're hosting a very low-budget wilderness cooking show, and now we'll add a generous portion of regret to this stew, along with some fireweed and crushed hope. You laugh at your own jokes. Someone has to. You've started saving the envelopes from the letters, folding them into little paper sculptures, cranes, boxes, tiny boats. You set them on a shelf by the window, where they catch the morning light. It feels symbolic, though you're not sure of what. Maybe it's just a way to remind yourself that the outside world hasn't entirely vanished. Sometimes the mail brings bad news, a friend from the service passed away, an old neighbour moved into a care home. You read those letters with a different kind of stillness. The cabin seems quieter afterwards. The fire sounds more like a sigh. But you don't break down. You just sit with it. Let the grief settle in like snow, slow and steady. You write back with honesty. You don't try to make it better. You just acknowledge it. That's enough. One letter from your younger brother sticks with you. He asks why you're still out here. Don't you get bored? Don't you miss people? You sit with that question for hours, days even, and when you finally reply, you write, I miss who people could be, not always who they are. Then you cross that out, too harsh. You try again, I miss good company, but I don't miss the noise that comes with it. That feels more honest. There's an open debate among wilderness psychologists, yes, that's apparently a thing, about whether extended isolation creates emotional numbness or emotional clarity. You don't feel numb. You feel filtered, like only the important emotions make it through now. Everything else, frustration, anxiety, whatever nonsense you used to feel waiting in line at the DMV, those things just don't survive out here. They freeze and fall away. You find new ways to communicate too. You carve messages into the snow with your boot when the pilot lands. Thank you. More coffee. Still alive. It's a strange kind of shorthand, but he always waves from the cockpit before lifting off again, and that small gesture means more than most words. One afternoon you write a long letter to no one in particular, just to whom it may concern. You write about the first moose you saw, the first night you spent in the cabin, the time you dropped a tin of beans into the fire and spent 10 minutes arguing with yourself about whether exploding legumes counted as a serious injury. You don't send the letter. You fold it into one of your tiny boats and float it across a snowdrift until it gets swallowed by the wind. Even the act of writing is different now. It's less about reporting, more about remembering. You're not trying to be profound. You're just trying to capture the texture of your days, the creak of the cabin, the smell of burning spruce, the way snow glows blue in the late afternoon light. Eventually you start filming yourself reading the letters out loud. You don't know why. Maybe it's just to hear another voice in the room, even if it's your own bouncing off the walls. You imagine someone watching these reels decades from now, trying to piece together who you were from the way your voice trembled when you read the line. We miss you, but we understand. And you hope they do understand that this wasn't about escape or isolation or proving anything. It was about making space. Space to think, to feel, to be. As you place the last of the letters back in their envelope and stow them in a wooden box under your cot, you feel a strange kind of peace settle over you. These scraps of paper, carried across miles of ice and sky, are your thread to the world. Thin, yes, but strong. Strong enough to remind you that solitude isn't the absence of connection. It's just a different kind of conversation. You wake to a distant drone, faint at first, like a memory echoing through the cold, Then it grows clearer, the low hum of a floatplane engine drifting over the mountains, circling low above Twin Lakes. You toss off the covers, boots already half on by the time you reach the door. It's been weeks since you've seen another living soul, maybe longer. You're not counting anymore. That part of your brain, the part that tracked days and appointments and other people's birthdays, has gone soft with disuse, but the sound of a plane, that still lights a spark. Outside, the world is blinding. Snow stretches in every direction, smooth and untouched, except for the tracks you've worn between cabin, woodshed, and outhouse. You raise a hand against the sun's low glare as the plane bank circles once and begins its descent. It's not your usual supply drop. You know that before the skis even kiss the ice, this one's different. The door pops open, and out steps a figure bundled in furs and flannel, face half covered with a scarf. You recognise the gait before the voice. It's Ed, one of the old park service rangers you'd met during your early trips up here. Back when you were still half civilised, still worried about whether you packed enough batteries, or if you remembered to mail your tax return. He hasn't changed much. Maybe a little more grey, a little more squint in his eyes. But he still walks like someone who's used to having the forest listen when he speaks. "Thought I'd come check on the ghost of Twin Lakes," he shouts, voice muffled by the scarf. You grin. "Good timing, I just finished talking to the trees." He laughs, stomps across the snow and pulls you into a quick manly hug. It's awkward. It always is. Not because you don't appreciate it, but because your body's forgotten how to respond to physical contact. You pat his back like you're calming a skittish dog and invite him inside. The cabin's small but warm, and Ed sheds his layers like a bear shedding winter. He eyes your stacked firewood, your shelves of preserved jars, your tiny spoon collection with an amused expression. "Still a one-man operation, huh?" "Unless you count the fox," you say, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched tin mugs, "which I do." He nods slowly as he sips, scanning the walls like they're a museum. Place looks good, like it's always been here. You don't say it, but that might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about your cabin. These visits are rare, and you know they're never just casual. Rangers don't fly out this far unless they've got a reason. Sure enough, Ed pulls a crumpled envelope from his coat pocket and sets it on the table. "From headquarters," he says. "Paperwork stuff. Don't worry, you're not being evicted." You raise an eyebrow and open the letter, scanning quickly. Nothing urgent. A notice about updated land use designations. A request for weather logs. A gentle reminder to renew your permit. Bureaucracy doesn't sleep, even when you're living off snow and lentils. You thank him, fold the paper carefully and tuck it beside your journal. Then you both sit, sipping coffee, letting the fire fill the space between words. It's not uncomfortable. Just measured. You've forgotten how much conversation is made of filler. Ed doesn't do filler, that's probably why you like him. After a while he starts asking questions. How's the hunting been? Any trouble with predators? Still filming? Still writing? You answer honestly, hunting's been sparse. You've had to rely more on lentils and memory. The last bear sighting was early autumn. He didn't linger. Yes, you're still filming, still writing. Always. He chuckles. You know, people ask about you. Not just the park service, others, writers. Some film crew wanted to fly up here last year, but we told them no dice. You shrug. Nothing to film but a bearded guy talking to a kettle. That's what they want, he says. Mystery man in the woods, living off beans and existential dread. You both laugh, and for a moment, you remember what real laughter feels like. Not the kind you do alone, chuckling at your own clumsy dance with the axe or muttering at Clyde for stealing your boot rag. This is shared laughter, the kind that warms your chest like good whiskey. Later you walk together out to the lake, standing side by side as the wind picks up and brushes snow across the surface like powdered sugar. Ed looks out at the mountains, silent for a while, then says, "You ever think about coming back?" You knew this question was coming. It always does. "Sometimes," you say. "Usually when I run out of coffee." He smiles but doesn't press, just nods. "World's still messy," he offers. "Not that it was ever tidy." "I know," you say. "That's why I'm here." There's a long pause. Not tense, just thoughtful. He knows you're not trying to escape anything, or anyone. You just found something out here the rest of the world forgot. Something still and honest. You didn't leave civilization because you hated it. You left because this place, with its silence and cold and unforgiving clarity, made more sense. Before he leaves, Ed hands you a small box, wrapped in brown paper and twine, with your name scrawled in permanent marker. From your brother, he says. Didn't want it getting wet. You open it after the plane takes off. Inside, a book, a small bottle of ink, a few instant coffee packets, and a short letter. Your brother writes like he talks. Direct. No fluff. Still don't understand how you live like this, it reads. But I admire it. Mum would have too. Merry Christmas, I guess. You reread it 3 times, not because it's long, because it feels rare. Real. A tiny bridge between 2 lives that no longer run parallel. You add the book to your shelf, the ink to your writing kit, and ration the coffee like it's liquid gold. That night you sit by the stove reading the new book and sipping 1 perfect cup of store-bought instant sludge and feel something strange stir in your chest. Not longing, not regret, just a soft ache, the kind you get when you remember that people are out there, people who still care even if they don't understand. You take out your journal and write a new entry, not about the weather, or Clyde's most recent shenanigans, or how the frost on the cabin nails looks like sugar dust. Just a few simple words. Today, someone came, and I didn't feel alone. There's an ongoing debate in solitude studies, yes, that's also a thing, about whether human connection is essential or merely comforting. Whether a person can truly live without others, you don't have the answer. But you know this. Solitude, when chosen, is strength, but connection, when unexpected, is a kind of grace. You fall asleep that night with the envelope under your pillow and the fire still crackling, the sound softer somehow. The silence welcomes you again, not empty, but full. And in your dream, you're walking across the lake with someone beside you. No words, just shared footprints in the snow. You've developed a rhythm so precise, so clockwork, it could be mistaken for ritual. Not because you're rigid, far from it, but because out here, the routine is what keeps you tethered. Wake up, stoke the fire, melt snow for water, eat a hot meal, record the temperature, the cloud cover, the wind's mood, chop wood, check snares, write, watch, listen, repeat. In the absence of the world's constant noise, you've carved out your own structure, and now you move through it like it's choreography, like it's muscle memory more than conscious thought. But don't get it twisted. This isn't mindless. It's discipline. It's survival. And maybe, secretly, it's comfort. These small, repeating acts are your anchors. They're how you fight off the slide into aimlessness, which in this deep winter silence is more dangerous than any storm or bear. You've learned that survival out here isn't just about shelter or food. It's about focus, about choosing how you spend your hours when no one else is watching. You start each day by logging the weather, not because you have to, but because you want to. The cabin wall is now lined with a series of notebooks, each one filled with tidy lines of handwriting cataloguing temperatures, barometric guesses, cloud shapes, wind directions, and bird activity. A less charitable soul might call it obsessive. You call it data with a soul. You're not just tracking the weather, you're tracking time itself, its fingerprints, its breath. Your thermometer broke last week, froze solid and cracked like a piece of candy. You held it in your palm, muttering mild profanity, then laughed. Because of course it did. Alaska doesn't care about your tools. You made a new one using alcohol in a glass vial and some guesswork. It's not exact, but it gives you a sense of how much you should regret going outside. The daily entries have started to include more than just weather. You find yourself narrating the patterns. A certain bird reappears after 3 days of wind. The ice thickens faster when the moon is full. You're not a scientist, not formally, but this feels like science in its rawest form. Observation pattern, hypothesis, wonder. You even name the cloud shape sometimes. Not the Latin, official names, your own. Ship sails, fat rabbit, mule's breath. You draw them too, little scribbles in the margins. It's ridiculous, you love it. Your journal has become a living document. Not just weather and sketches, but moments. The time the stove flared up and nearly singed your eyebrows. The day Clyde brought you a dead vole and left it neatly on the porch like a housewarming gift. The strange howling you heard one night, distant and low like wolves. Or something pretending to be wolves. You still don't know. You made a note. You left it alone. There's a page for every habit now. To do when woodpile is low. Moose distance estimation tips. Sourdough disasters and lessons learned. One particularly dog-eared section is simply titled Rules of the Cabin. The rules are simple, not laws, more like truths discovered the hard way. Rule 1. Never let the fire go out. Not just because it's cold, but because light matters. Warmth matters. Even a flickering flame in a tin stove feels like companionship when the wind is howling hard enough to make the roof creak. Rule 2. Don't rush. Rushing breaks things. Ankles, tools, patience. It invites mistakes. And out here, mistakes compound quickly. Rule 3. Eat hot food. Every day. Even if it's just a tin of beans with some pine needles thrown in for spice. Hot food reminds you that you're still human, still alive. Still choosing to keep going. Rule 4. Talk to something. Anything. Doesn't matter if it's Clyde, a raven, the kettle, or the ghost of a thought you haven't had since 1974. You go too long without speaking. Your voice starts to feel like a stranger. Rule 5. Respect the cold. Always. It's not cruel. It's just honest. It will teach you things, but only if you survive long enough to learn them. You've added and amended the rules over time, crossed some out, rewritten others in firmer handwriting. They're not gospel, but they've become your code. They're what keep you from drifting, from falling into that fog that can sneak into the minds of people who spend too long with nothing but trees and their own reflection. Every so often you come across stories of other people who tried this kind of life and didn't last. Some got hurt, some got bored, some just unravelled. The wild doesn't break you quickly, it breaks you slowly, quietly. It whispers, not shouts. You have to be sharper than your loneliness, and sharper still than your comfort. That's why the routine matters. You've added a few new daily habits in recent weeks. One is stretching. That sounds almost civilized, doesn't it? But it started when you woke up with a back so tight you could barely stand. Now you do a strange little yoga meets wilderness ritual every morning by the stove. Arms overhead, deep breaths, balance exercises. You don't know if it looks impressive or ridiculous, and you're glad no one's filming. Another habit is observation walks. Not long, not treks. Just quiet strolls around the cabin, out to the lake, past the woodshed, maybe up the ridge if the snow's crusted hard enough to hold your weight. You carry your notebook, a pencil stub, your knife. You write down what you see. Lichen colours, new tracks, frost formations that look like coral or glass. A weird icicle growing sideways from a branch. These small things, they anchor you. There's a certain joy in doing the same thing every day and noticing how it's not the same. The tracks are different. The snow falls softer. The wind moans a new tune. You learn to notice the change not in dramatic shifts but in subtle rearrangements. Out here, repetition doesn't numb you, it sharpens you. There's a quirky old quote that floats around wilderness lore. A man who chops his own wood is twice warmed. You think that's wrong. He's warmed 3 times. When he chops it, when he stacks it, and when he sits back down by the fire and watches the steam rise from his bowl of soup, feeling his fingertips again. You've also come to realise that routine doesn't mean stagnation, it's structure. And inside that structure, your mind roams freely. Some of your clearest thoughts come while sweeping the cabin floor. Some of your best ideas hit you while you're fishing a chunk of burnt bread from the stove and muttering something unrepeatable. Philosophers back in the civilized world write about mindfulness like it's this grand concept. You're pretty sure you found it while scrubbing soot from a pot and watching a spider rebuild its web in the corner. You didn't seek clarity. You built it. Like a cabin. One log at a time. And maybe that's the real point of all this. Not escape, not survival, but attention. Out here, nothing happens unless you notice it. And when you do notice it, really notice, it transforms, becomes a thing worth writing down. A thing worth remembering. So you keep writing, logging, stretching, observing, repeating. And in that repetition, you are not wasting time. You're building a life. You wake up before the sun, not because you want to, but because something's wrong. It's too quiet. Which, out here, says a lot. Normally the wind rustles the trees, or Clyde the fox knocks over a tin pan just to remind you who's really in charge of the territory. But today, nothing. Not even the creak of the cabin settling. You sit up slowly, and that's when you feel it. The kind of cold that sneaks in like a thief and settles under your skin. It's colder than it's been in weeks. Not a sharp, biting cold, but the heavy kind. The kind that makes the air feel like it's pressing in on you. You pull on your coat, tug your boots over thick socks, and open the door to a world transformed. The snow has stopped. Everything is locked in a hard freeze. The lake has vanished under a thick crust of silver-blue ice polished by wind. The trees stand brittle and still, rimmed with frost so fine it looks painted on. The air stings your nostrils as you inhale. Even your beard stiffens with ice within minutes. You don't need a thermometer to tell you. It's well below zero. And then you see the tracks. They start a few dozen feet from the cabin. Large, spaced out, deliberate. Moose. Big one. You follow them down the ridge, moving slow, boots crunching like glass with every step. There's a strange pulse to it. This kind of quiet pursuit. You're not hunting, not exactly. You just want to see where it went, how close it came. Tracking gives you purpose, wakes up a part of your brain that hasn't had much exercise lately. You move through the trees, head down, reading the story left behind. The depth of the prints, the way they scuff the snow. It tells you everything he wasn't in a hurry. Probably moving toward the open lake, looking for exposed brush, or maybe just wandering like you do some mornings when you've got more questions than answers. You crest a low hill, and there he is. Massive, motionless, standing in a clearing surrounded by birch. His breath hangs in the air in long, slow clouds. You freeze, barely breathing. He turns his head slightly, ears twitching, but doesn't bolt, just watches. You're far enough to be no threat, close enough to feel the gravity of him. It's like standing near a living statue, majestic and faintly ridiculous at the same time. You study the way his muscles shift beneath his winter coat, the way his legs plant firmly in the snow like he owns this stretch of earth. You think, he could kill me if he wanted. And weirdly, you feel calm about that. There's an understanding here, an unspoken agreement. Stay respectful, stay still, and we both walk away from this wiser. After a long moment he snorts and turns, lumbering away through the trees like some ancient creature from a forgotten story. You let out the breath you'd been holding and walk back slowly, stopping every so often to glance back at the trail he left behind. Hoof prints pressed into the snow like hieroglyphs. When you return to the cabin, it feels smaller, cozier. The kind of place you're glad to come back to after facing something that could have crushed you without effort. You take off your coat, light the stove, and sit for a while just staring into the fire, letting the feeling settle. There's an open question among wildlife biologists about how much animals perceive humans as part of their world. Do they recognize you as a creature, a presence, a potential threat? Or are you just another odd sound in the landscape? After moments like this, you start to think the answer might be yes to all of it. That moose saw you, not just physically, but saw you. Later you write the whole thing down, of course. Sketch the hoofprint, note the posture, try to capture the way it felt to stand there, frozen in awe. But words fall short, as they always do. It's like trying to bottle a breeze. That night something stirs in you, a kind of restlessness you haven't felt in months. You step back outside, now that the fire's low and the wind has died, and take one of your longer night walks. No flashlight. Just the moon and the snow, bright enough to make everything glow like a dream. You follow the lake's edge, where the ice has cracked in long, jagged lines. You press your ear to it and hear the faint, otherworldly groan of the ice shifting beneath itself. It sounds like whales calling to each other across some distant frozen sea. You smile, whispering, still breathing, to no one. And then suddenly you hear it. Crunch. Behind you. Soft but deliberate. You spin, heart hammering. Nothing. Just trees. Still, you wait. Listening, watching. Another crunch. Off to the left this time. You kneel, still as stone. There, just beyond the edge of the trees, eyes, reflecting moonlight. Yellow, unblinking, low to the ground. A wolf, no. Two. Maybe more in the shadows. You don't move. You don't run. You just hold their gaze, every cell in your body screaming, "This is real. This is now." The wolves don't charge. They don't slink closer. They just watch. One cocks its head slightly, as if trying to decide whether you belong here or not. After a minute, or an hour, or a lifetime, they vanish. Silently, like breath on glass. You walk back to the cabin faster than usual, rifle in hand but unraised. Your pulse takes a long time to settle, and as you sit by the fire again, rubbing warmth back into your hands, you think about that moose, those wolves, and the thin line that separates awe from fear. Out here, that line is everything. Some people think living in the wilderness is about control, about dominating the environment, carving out space, surviving against the odds you know better now. It's about surrender, about accepting that you're not in charge, never were, and that survival is a negotiation you renew every day. There's a quote you half remember from a book you read long ago. You do not conquer the wilderness, you join it. That feels true now, more than ever. Before bed, you write one more line in your journal, in the corner of the page beside your sketch of the moose. Today, I was reminded that I am small, and that small is enough. The first thing you hear is a thud. Not the normal kind, a log falling off the woodpile, or the shifting of ice on the lake. This one is closer, heavier. You sit up in your cot, heart already thumping, and listen. Another sound, a rustle, then a sniff. A long, dragging, unmistakable sniff, right outside the cabin wall. You know what it is before you even reach for the rifle. You've read about this moment a dozen times in survival manuals, heard stories from pilots and trappers and old-timers who made their peace with the wild years before you ever touched an axe. But none of that prepares you for the sudden sinking knowledge that a full-grown grizzly is on the other side of your wall, probably within 10 feet of your bed, and there's only a few inches of pine and chinking between the two of you. You don't panic. You can't panic. You go still. Your breath slows. You grip the rifle in one hand and slide silently off the cot, socks barely whispering on the floor. You keep the lantern off. Let your eyes adjust to the moonlight trickling through the frost-rimmed window. There, by the far wall, the outline of its shadow massive. Moving slow. It sniffs again, a low snorting sound that vibrates through the wood. You don't move. Grizzlies, especially this time of year, don't mess around. Most are hibernating by now, which makes this one even more dangerous. If he's out and hungry, it means he's either been disturbed or couldn't find a den, or maybe he's just old and mean and not ready to lie down and die. Whatever the reason, he's here now. Investigating the cabin, testing the edge of your world. He moves around the side and you hear the soft crunch of snow under paws the size of dinner plates. He brushes against the wall. Then, another sound. Scraping. He's at the door. Your heart jumps. You remember the last bear encounter in the fall? That one was half curious, half lazy, content to wander off after a warning shot. But this bear wants in. He paws at the door. Not frantic, but purposeful. You raise the rifle, steadying it against the doorframe. Not to fire, not yet. You don't want to kill unless you have to. That's been your rule from the beginning. Respect everything. Harm nothing unless there's no other choice. But you also don't want your cabin turned into a salad bowl. Then comes the sound you dreaded. A low grunt, followed by the unmistakable creak of wood under weight. He's standing. You know what that means. Full height, 7 or 8 feet tall. You imagine his breath fogging the window, those claws, black, curved, lethal, resting inches from the hinges. You speak softly, evenly. "Okay, friend, that's close enough." He doesn't respond. Of course he doesn't. But something in your voice, some vibration, maybe, or the shift in your scent, makes him pause. He sniffs again. Then another sound. This time, a soft huff. Not aggressive, more like disappointment. He drops back down with a whump that shakes the floor. You wait, rifle steady, muscles tight, then the footsteps, slow, dragging. He's moving away, circling back toward the edge of the cabin. You listen for a long time before you finally hear the sound of him vanishing into the trees. You don't relax until the night feels empty again, hollow, safe. You don't go back to sleep. Instead, you sit at the window, rifle across your lap, eyes scanning the darkness while the fire in the stove dies down to coals. You know he'll be back. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not this week. But a bear that finds a structure once almost always returns. They don't forget. In the morning, you go outside cautiously, stepping through the new dusting of snow with the wariness of someone who now knows just how thin the line is between confidence and catastrophe. The tracks are there, massive prints pressed deep into the snow, winding from the woods, around the cabin, up to the door. You kneel and place your hand beside one print. It makes your fingers look like a child's. You check the food cache, untouched. That's a win. You reinforce it anyway, adding more wire, tightening the lashings, stacking frozen branches around the base. Every sound in the woods makes your shoulders tighten. Even Clyde, darting from a bush with that fox-like shrug of indifference, makes you jump. The experience stays with you all day. Not fear exactly, but alertness. A kind of cellular awareness that takes hours to fade. Your movements are slower, your eyes more focused. You keep the rifle closer than usual. You double-check the window latches. You rebuild the door brace. You pretend you're just being prudent, but you know the truth. A bear at your door in the middle of winter isn't just a threat. It's a reminder. You are not the apex predator here. There's a scholarly debate, one of those endless back and forths in dusty university journals, about whether humans ever truly stopped being prey. Sure, we've got buildings and weapons and passwords, but under it all, the argument goes, we still carry the prey animal's instincts. You're starting to believe that. The way your body reacts to a sound in the dark, the way your breath shallows when you feel watched, none of that comes from logic. It comes from something older, something deeper. By mid-afternoon, you've calmed. The fire is going strong again. You sit with your back to the warm stove and sketch the bear's paw print in your journal. You try to capture the size of it, the weight. You fail. Words can't hold it. But you write down the feeling anyway. Then, almost as an afterthought, you scribble a new line beneath your rules of the cabin. Rule 6. Don't mistake solitude for safety. You've lived alone for long enough now that you sometimes forget the difference between peace and vulnerability. This bear was a lesson in that, not a punishment, just a wake-up call. You can be good at this. You can be prepared, even confident. But the wild has its own plans. That night you sleep with one hand on the rifle, just in case. But the bear doesn't return. What does return is the wind. Around midnight it picks up, rushing down from the mountain passes and hitting the cabin with a howl that almost sounds like language. You lie awake listening to it, and imagine the bear out there somewhere, wind brushing its fur, eyes still gleaming in the dark. You wonder what it dreams about. You wonder if it remembers you. And you fall asleep imagining that for a moment your lives ran parallel. Two creatures circling warmth in the dead of winter, both trying to find a way through the night. The wind doesn't stop for 3 days. It howls like some unseen animal, trapped between the mountains and furious about it. It comes in waves. First a low moan, then a rising scream, then silence so sudden you think it's over. But it never is. You wake up each night to the sound of it testing the seams of the cabin, clawing at the shutters, rattling the stovepipe like it wants in. The roof groans, the logs creak, and every so often you brace yourself for the sound of something giving way. But the cabin holds. Of course it does. You built it. This is when you start to understand the real value of handmade things, not just because you know every joint, every peg, every notch, but because you remember why you built it that way. You didn't cut corners. You didn't trust shortcuts. When the storm hits, it's not just wood and nails keeping you safe. It's all the hours you spent sweating over measurements and arguing with gravity. It's the trust you built with yourself. Still, you don't leave anything to chance. Each morning you walk the perimeter, wind or no wind. Hat pulled low, scarf wrapped around your face, you move from wall to wall, inspecting for damage. You reinforce the food cache, check the woodshed, shake snow off the solar panel you barely use but still feel weirdly attached to. You notice one of the shutters has come loose, hinges bent by the constant battering. You take it down, carry it inside, and spend the afternoon recarving a new mount. This is how you spend your days now, repairing, reinforcing, making things that already work better. And in the process, you make peace with the fact that perfection isn't a thing you ever reach. It's just a direction you move toward, like north or silence. You begin carving more too, not just spoons and utensils anymore. Now it's tools, hinges, handles, furniture upgrades. You've even started making things you don't need just because the act of creating something from nothing feels like a kind of rebellion against the emptiness of winter. A bowl, a shelf, a tiny, intricate lock you know no one will ever pick because no one's here to try. There's a fringe idea among wilderness crafters, a belief that when you make something with your hands in solitude, it holds part of you in it. Not in a spiritual way exactly, but in the details, the small flaws, the way a handle fits just right in your grip. You believe that now. You run your fingers along the grain of a finished piece, and feel, somehow, known. You start writing more poetry. Bad poetry by most standards, but you're not submitting it anywhere. It's not for readers. It's for the silence you write about the wind, about the bear, about Clyde and his smug little tracks in the snow. You write about the strange shape the icicles make when the wind pushes them sideways, like the cabin's growing teeth. One night, you reread your old journals and find something that makes you pause. An entry from your first month here. You'd written, "What if I can't do this?" You don't remember writing it. You remember the feeling, but the fear itself has faded, like a shadow at noon. Now, looking back, it seems almost laughable. You did do this, you're doing it, and not just barely. You smile and write underneath the old entry. Turns out I could. Who knew? The routine continues. Firewood, repairs, cooking, writing. But there's a new energy to it now. Something quieter than joy, but deeper than contentment. Call it presence. You find yourself humming while you cook, tapping rhythms on the edge of the stove while you wait for tea to boil. You talk aloud more often, not out of loneliness, but out of habit. You narrate your tasks like you're teaching a very slow, very quiet apprentice. Now we stir the stew. Not too fast, it doesn't like that. You find humour in everything. You drop a boot into the snow and give it a full eulogy before fishing it out. You burn a batch of biscuits and leave one out on the stump with a note. For the brave and toothless. Clyde steals it anyway. Speaking of Clyde, he's been around more lately. You don't feed him, not directly, but you're not exactly hiding your scraps either. He's smart, patient, observant. Once, you catch him watching you through the window. You open the door and he doesn't bolt. Just sits there, tail wrapped around his feet like a sphinx, eyes narrowed like he's auditing your tax records. You say, "Do you want a tour?" He blinks once. The wind rattles the stovepipe again. You close the door and laugh harder than you have in weeks. There's something about living in a place where everything you use was either made by you or chosen with care. Every object has a story. The knife you've sharpened 1,000 times, the kettle with the dent from when you dropped it in the creek, the wooden chair you oversanded until it rocked slightly, like it's always trying to take a nap. Your clothes have all been patched so many times they're more thread than fabric. You're wearing a coat your brother sent you 3 winters ago, and the elbows are now reinforced with scraps from an old wool sock. Your mittens are stitched with fishing line. Your hat smells like cedar smoke and bread dough, and something unnameable but undeniably you. There's a scholarly theory about the domestic wilderness. The idea that when you stay long enough in an untamed place, it starts to feel like home, and you start treating it like a house you believe it. But you'd add something else to it. It's not just that you make the wild domestic, it's that the wild changes your sense of what home is. Home isn't walls, it isn't lights or locks or Wi-Fi. It's the place where you know which floorboard creaks, where you can smell when the wind is about to shift, where the trees feel like neighbours and the stars feel like ceiling tiles, where the silence is a kind of conversation. One afternoon, as the wind finally starts to die down, you go outside and stand on the ridge behind the cabin. The valley below is pristine, untouched snow stretching for miles, unbroken except for your own tracks and the wandering trail of a moose far in the distance. You stand there for a long time, breathing in the cold, your beard stiff with frost, the mountain standing silent and ancient all around you. You close your eyes. Feel the sun on your face. It's weak, but it's enough. You say aloud to no one in particular, "I'm still here," not defiant, not surprised, just sure. You head back to the cabin, boots crunching with each step. Inside, the fire waits. So does the journal, and the stew, and a lopsided wooden spoon you whittled while listening to the wind argue with itself. And as night falls, you do what you always do. You light the lamp, you keep going. The sun begins to climb a little higher each day now. It's not much, just an inch or 2 above the mountains, but it stays a touch longer, throws a bit more warmth against the snow, like a shy apology for the months it spent hiding. You notice it first in the shadows. They stretch just a little less. The blue in the snow turns softer, brighter. Then the sounds change. Water, somewhere, begins to move again. A faint trickle under the ice. A promise. You don't let yourself get excited. False springs happen out here. The land will tease you, give you a few mild days, then slam you with another 3 feet of snow just to make sure you're still paying attention, but still, you mark it down. A journal entry underlined twice. First melt. Inside the cabin, the rhythm remains steady, but you can feel something shifting. Not just in the weather, but in you. Winter's long grip has been a strange kind of blessing. Quiet, brutal, clarifying. You've passed through it like a needle through cloth, thread pulled taut, weaving something together without knowing exactly what it will be when it's done. And now, you begin to reflect. Not just on what you've done, but why. It comes slowly, like everything out here does. You're cutting kindling one morning, your hands moving on instinct when the thought lands. Why did I really come here? Not the simple answers, not to get away or to try something different, not the tidy lines you wrote to friends in letters, the real answer. The one you haven't let yourself fully look at. You pause, knife in one hand, the wood split clean in the other. You stare at the wall for a long moment before setting both down and walking out into the snow. The silence welcomes you. The lake glints like brushed steel under a paper-thin crust of ice. The mountains don't blink. You sit on a stump by the lake's edge and let the thoughts come. You'd always told yourself this life was about simplicity, about peeling back the noise of the world and returning to something essential. That's true, yes, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is messier. You came here because you were tired of the clatter, of the performative chaos of everyday life, tired of talking without meaning it, tired of being told what mattered when your gut told you otherwise. You weren't angry, you weren't bitter, you were just done, quietly, like slipping out of a crowded room and closing the door without making a sound. And maybe, deep down, you came here to find out what was left when everything else was gone, when there were no people to impress, no job to hold, no deadlines to hit, no schedule, no noise, just you, just breath and wind and fire. You stand again and stretch, shoulders tight, spine popping like dry wood. You feel lighter, not relieved exactly, but honest, like a truth you've been circling finally let you sit beside it. Back in the cabin, you pull out a fresh notebook, not for weather logs, not for checklists or carving plans. This one is different. This one is for the why. You write that word on the first page in all caps, underline it twice, then slowly you begin. You write about your father, about how he used to take you walking in the woods behind the house, how he'd stop and point out tracks, or listen for birds, how he never spoke much but somehow said a lot anyway. You write about your mother, who filled every room with stories and music and a kind of quiet power you didn't fully understand until much later. You write about the war, and the noise, and the afterward, how silence felt like healing, even when it was heavy. You don't write fast. You pause often, stare out the window, stir the fire, let the memories rise like steam. You write about the people you left behind, not because you hated them, but because you didn't know how to stay. About how the world kept asking for more, and you didn't have anything left to give. And then, finally, you write about this place, about what it's done to you. Because it has changed you, that much is clear. You're not the same man who stepped off the float plane with crates of tools and a head full of questions. That man was trying to prove something. This man just wants to live honestly. And here's the fringe theory. Maybe the wilderness doesn't just strip you down. It gives you back only what you need. Not less, not more. Just what's essential. The rest. The pride, the anxiety, the clutter. It falls away. Gets buried in the snow like everything else. You look around at the cabin. It's still small, still simple, but now it's full, not with things, with presence. Every notch in the beams, every mark on the floor, every patched corner, it's all part of your story now. There's no decor here, no design choices, just truth, shaped in wood and fire and sweat. You start talking aloud again, more than usual. Not in a losing it way, at least you tell yourself that, but in a remembering how to be human way. You speak to the fire like it's an old friend. You tell Clyde when he's being a menace. You read your journal entries out loud just to hear the words echo back at you. One night you catch your reflection in the frosted window and stare. The beard's thicker, sure. The lines around your eyes are deeper, but there's something else, a steadiness, a calm. Like the part of you that used to flinch at shadows has finally sat down and made peace with them. You fall asleep that night in your cot, the fire low but steady, and dream a simple dream. You're walking across a wide field of snow, and every step leaves a glowing print behind you. Not bright, just enough. Like you're writing your story into the land one step at a time. There's a debate among solitude scholars, yes, they really exist, about whether isolation heightens self-awareness or just amplifies the voices already in your head. Some argue that you become more you when you're alone. Others say you become a version of yourself that only exists when unobserved. You don't know which is right. Maybe both. All you know is this. When the only person watching is you, you start to ask better questions. And slowly the answers begin to arrive. You don't need a calendar to know winter's still hanging on. It's in the air, dry, brittle, full of that electric sting when you touch anything metal. But spring is near. You feel it deep in your bones. Not just because the sun lingers a bit longer on your cabin walls, or because the snowdrifts are finally beginning to soften around the base of the trees. It's in the way the birds have started to come back, one or two at a time, tentative as if asking permission. The first time you hear one call in the early morning, just a single clear note, it stops you mid-stir, spoon hovering over a pot of oats. It sounds like hope. But spring in Alaska doesn't arrive with flowers and sunshine. No. It arrives with melting ice and slush that grabs your boots like it's trying to pull you under. It arrives with grey skies and moody fog that rolls down from the mountains like it's looking for trouble. And most of all, it arrives with wind, wild, whistling, restless wind that picks up in the afternoon and makes the entire forest sound like it's sighing. Inside, the cabin feels tighter now. Not claustrophobic, but more lived in. The walls have absorbed the winter, your breath, your silence. Everything smells like pine, smoke and old paper. Your journals line the shelf above the cot. Tools hang neatly, handles worn smooth from use. You've stopped keeping things you don't need. There's no room for excess in a life like this. Every object has a job. Every scrap of cloth, every nail, every chipped spoon carries a history and a purpose. You've learned to sharpen not just your tools, but your perception. Days blur, but the moments don't. You remember the first time you stepped outside without gloves and didn't regret it. The first time a patch of ground reappeared beneath a tree, dark and rich and steaming in the sunlight. You crouched down and touched it with your bare hand, half expecting it to vanish. It didn't. It just stayed, warm and real, a promise. There's a peculiar sound out here in spring, something you'd forgotten existed. Running water. It starts as a drip from the roof, then a trickle down the slope, then the lake groans and pops as the ice begins to shift, cracking like bones after a long sleep. You hear it in the middle of the night sometimes, a deep echoing pop from beneath the ice. The first time it jolted you awake. Now it's just part of the background noise. You've even given it a name in your journal, Lake Talk. And with thaw comes work, new work, not survival anymore. Not in the urgent way it was when the wind tried to rip the cabin apart and every log split was the difference between warmth and frostbite. This work feels different, purposeful, anticipatory. You patch the roof where snowmelt seeped through. You dig trenches around the base of the cabin to keep runoff from pooling. You repair the hinges on the outhouse door. A bear swatted at it sometime during the freeze and left a dent the size of your fist. You trace it with your fingers and add it to the long, strange list of things that have tried to enter your life uninvited. One morning, you spot a group of geese flying overhead, honking like they own the sky. You watch them disappear over the ridge and feel something you haven't felt in months. Movement. The world is shifting again. The gears are turning. Soon the ice will break, the water will flow, and if the pilot can land safely, the plane will return. You think about that more now. People. Contact. Someone else's voice echoing in this valley. You're not craving it, not exactly. But there's a readiness building in you. Like a sprout pushing through the soil, unsure of the weather but too stubborn to wait any longer. Still, you're not rushing anything. Instead, you do what you always do. You observe. You walk the trails around the cabin, noting new prints in the thawing snow. Hare, moose, something else you can't quite identify. You jot down notes in your weather log. A robin appears one afternoon, bright and round, hopping near your water cache like he's been sent to inspect your setup. You nod at him and say, "Right on time," and he flicks his tail like he disapproves of your outfit. You begin gathering supplies to start planting. Not a full garden, not yet, but enough. You clear a patch of ground you'd marked last year, now soft enough to work with a shovel again. You dig slow, methodical. There's satisfaction in it. The smell of dirt, the give of the earth, the crunch of last year's leaves crumbling between your fingers. You've missed this. Growing something, watching life return on purpose. There's a scholarly debate about whether wilderness homesteading promotes independence or simply replaces one set of dependencies with another. Does living off the grid make you free, or does it just tie you more tightly to the cycles of weather, land and body? Out here you don't feel free in the flag-waving sense, you feel necessary, needed by your own life. That's better. And as the melt continues, so do the surprises. One evening, while checking your snare lines, you stumble across something strange. A rock, small and smooth, perfectly round, sitting right in the centre of your trail. Not a big deal, except you know it wasn't there before. You kneel down, pick it up, and turn it over in your hand. It's oddly warm. You glance around, squinting at the tree line. No movement, no tracks, just forest. You carry the stone back to the cabin, set it on the windowsill, and spend the rest of the evening wondering. You write about it in your journal under the heading, Weird Rock, Unknown Origin. You half expect Clyde to have placed it there as a prank. Speaking of which, the fox is back in full force. Spring has put a bounce in his step. You see him most mornings now, trotting along the ridge, tail high, eyes sharp. He's found a mate, it seems. One morning you spot two of them chasing each other through the thawing underbrush like children. You smile, not just because it's funny, but because it feels earned, like a reward. One night, after a long day of chopping, digging and staring at that mysterious rock as if it holds secret messages, you step outside and sit on the cabin's front step. The wind is soft. The lake is quiet. Overhead the stars return, brighter now that the clouds are retreating. You can see Orion again, tilted slightly in the sky, still watching, always watching. You speak aloud, just once, barely louder than a breath. I'm still here. It's not a declaration, not a plea, just a fact. You're still here, still living, still noticing. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, the land answers back, not with sound, but with warmth. The wind shifts, the trees sway. Somewhere deep in the woods, an owl calls once, low and calm. You nod and go inside, leaving the door open just a crack, letting the spring in. The first night it rains, you don't believe it at first. You're sitting by the fire, flipping through your old journal entries, half nostalgia, half quality control, and you hear it. A soft, uneven tapping on the roof, not snow shifting, not ice cracking, liquid. You pause, listen, then step outside barefoot onto the porch just to make sure you're not imagining it. The air smells different, damp, earthy, like wet leaves and old pine. The kind of smell you didn't realize you missed until it came back. You close your eyes and tilt your head up. Cold droplets kiss your face. You grin like a lunatic. The rain doesn't last long, just an hour or two, but it's enough to soak the world and wake it up. In the morning, the landscape looks smeared and softened. Like a watercolour painting, someone ran a wet brush across patches of snow have collapsed into slush, and the lake ice has thinned to the point where it no longer groans. It just cracks. Thin lines zigzag across the surface like spiderwebs, and you keep your distance, resisting the urge to test it. You've survived too long to go ice skating on sheer optimism, but the rain changes everything. You can feel it. It's like the forest has exhaled after holding its breath for months. You notice more birdsong now, varied, overlapping, chaotic in a way that feels joyful. The squirrels are back, bickering in the trees, and you swear Clyde's tail is fluffed up by at least 20% since the thaw. Everything's stretching, waking up, testing the air with cautious curiosity. You do the same. The paths you've worn all winter are gone now, drowned in muck and melting snow. You start walking new ones. Every step squelches, each boot sunk half an inch deeper than you planned. But it's movement, and that's enough. You hike up toward the ridge more often now, partly for the view, partly to see if the mail plane's going to reappear. You know it's too early, but still, you scan the sky just in case. The melt brings work, as always. You dig channels to redirect runoff away from the cabin foundation. You restack part of the woodpile that slumped sideways under the weight of melting snow one afternoon. You realise your tool shed being generous, has started to lean like it's considering retirement. You brace it with salvaged logs and whisper kind encouragements like, Just hold on one more season, old man. The forest smells alive now. It's subtle at first, not the rich green scent of summer, but a kind of thawed musk, mud, bark, sap, decomposition. You get nosefuls of rot and renewal at the same time, which seems appropriate. Nature doesn't separate the two the way people do. You start fishing again, not seriously, just practice. The ice along the shoreline has retreated enough to cast into a few cold, slow-moving pockets. You stand there for hours, rod in hand, watching your reflection shift and blur in the water. You catch nothing the first few days, but you don't mind. The act of casting feels sacred again, like prayer, but wetter. One morning, you pull in a small grayling, barely a pound. You hold it for a moment, wet scales flashing like living chrome in the dawn light. You almost let it go, but you haven't had fresh fish since last fall, so you whisper an apology, clean it fast and cook it over the fire in butter and wild garlic. It tastes like something earned, like spring cracking open in your mouth. You begin airing out the cabin now that the worst of the cold is behind you. You hang blankets on a line, prop the door open for hours at a time, let the breeze wander through like an old friend who doesn't knock anymore. The smell of smoke fades slowly, replaced by pine and damp earth. The first fly of the season buzzes lazily against the window, and instead of swatting it, you just watch another survivor. You nod at it and get back to your carving. You've taken to sleeping with one less blanket now. You even crack the window at night, just a hair, enough to let the cool air remind you that you're still here, still warm, still breathing. The fire burns lower these days. You're no longer feeding it like a life support machine, more like a companion who doesn't need constant attention. The journal entries get longer now. Not out of boredom, but out of abundance. There's more to see, more to say. You find yourself waxing poetic about moss, about the first green blade poking up through a snowbank, about the way a single droplet hangs on a spruce needle like it's afraid to fall. You don't even care that your writing's gotten a little flowery. No one's grading you. You're not the same man who wrote those stiff, sparse entries at the start of the winter. That version of you was all efficiency. Log the facts, measure the cold, note the cloud cover. Now you write sentences like, "Today the lake looked like a sleeping eye waiting to open." You laugh when you read it back, but you leave it in anyway. The dreams change too. They're warmer now. No more frozen fields or endless whiteouts. Lately you dream of rain, of slow rivers, of walking barefoot through grass. Sometimes you dream of people, old friends mostly, but not in crowded rooms or noisy cities. They're here, in the cabin, drinking coffee and watching the fire, as if they've always known this place. One night, you dream of a fire so big it lights up the mountains. Not destructive, just bright. You're sitting with someone. You can't see their face, but you feel safe known. When you wake up, the cabin is quiet. The coals are glowing low in the stove. You sit there for a while in the dark, holding on to the warmth from your dream like it's something real. There's an open discussion among historians about whether solitude enhances memory or distorts it. Does being alone make you remember things more clearly? Or does your brain reshape the past to fill the silence? You've stopped trying to sort that out. The memories that visit you now, true or not, they're welcome. They keep you company. They ask nothing in return. One afternoon, while out walking, you find something strange. A cluster of feathers in the snow. Not fresh, not torn up, just arranged, fanned out like a rosette, delicate and deliberate. You kneel, fingers hovering above them, reluctant to disturb whatever odd magic left them that way. You don't touch them, you just observe. Then you walk on, a little slower, watching the treetops. The days continue to stretch. You stop lighting the lantern so early. The nights, while still cold, arrive later, and you can feel your body adjusting. There's a tension loosening in your chest, like something that's been coiled all winter is finally starting to unwind. You stretch more, you hum more, you even catch yourself singing aloud while you clean the stovepipe, badly, off-key, but joyfully. Spring isn't gentle out here. It's wet and loud and full of sharp contrasts, but it's real. It demands your attention, and slowly you give it. One night, you sit on the porch, watching the last of the ice drift lazily across the lake. A single loon cries out in the distance, a long rising note that echoes across the valley. You close your eyes and smile. Everything's waking up and so are you. It's a morning like any other. Quiet, grey, the air still carrying that dampness that settles in your joints and makes you question every decision you've ever made that involves squatting, bending, or lifting. You step outside, coffee in hand, and notice something immediately. Prints. Dozens of them. Some fresh, others softened by light overnight drizzle. They crisscross the clearing like a map drawn by something impatient and curious. And right at the edge of the lake, near the gravel cache, there it is again. A paw print not fox, not bear. This one's distinct. Canine. Wolf, most likely. But alone. You crouch, brush your hand along the edge of the print. Still sharp, maybe hours old, maybe less. You follow the tracks, moving slowly, boots squelching in the soft, semi-thawed ground. They weave between spruce trunks, pause near the outhouse, because of course they do, and loop back toward the ridge. You've seen wolves in the distance before, always at dusk, always a blur of fur and silence, but never this close. You log it in your journal, sketch the print, and leave a note in the margin. Same eyes as before. You don't mean it literally, but there's something about the presence of that animal that pulls at a thread in you, not fear, not even unease, just that primal awareness that you're not alone out here, that something's watching with the same quiet intensity you've developed over the seasons. Later that day, you begin organising your older weather logs. They've piled up on the shelf, threatening to avalanche onto your cot every time you bump the corner of the table. You sort them by year, by temperature patterns, by storms. You notice a strange pleasure in the repetition. Your own handwriting becoming a kind of weather pattern itself. Loops tighter in February, looser by April. Notes more clipped during storms, more poetic during thaws. You begin spotting patterns, not just in weather, but in animal movement. You've always tracked things instinctively, but now you start formalising it. A section of your journal becomes dedicated to animal behaviour. Moose spotted near the creek, April 14th, crosswind present, browsing on willow tips. 2 foxes, likely Clyde and mate morning activity increases post-rainfall. Woodpecker returns, same tree, same side, no idea why. There's an open debate in ecology circles, whether or not human observation can truly be objective when immersed this deeply in the environment. Some argue immersion warps your sense of scale, that you begin to anthropomorphise, assign narrative where there is only instinct. Others believe that this closeness reveals a deeper truth, one that can't be measured in peer-reviewed journals. You're firmly in the second camp. Because out here, observation is participation. You're not just watching the wilderness, you're part of its rhythm. You know where the snow melts first, where the moss stays green longest. You recognise which bird call belongs to which regular. You've become, in a way, a not quite invisible fixture in this ecosystem, not predator, not prey, just present. One evening, after a long walk up the ridge, you sit on a rock and begin sketching. Not anything specific, just shapes, lines that follow the horizon, a vague outline of trees, the shadow of the lake against the slope. Your hand moves without thinking. It's less about the result and more about the act of paying attention with your fingers, and then something remarkable happens. A rustle in the trees to your left. You turn slowly. 20 feet away, a wolf. Not running, not stalking, just standing, watching. You freeze, heart pounding but breath steady. It's lean, grey, with a white muzzle and those eyes. Bright, calm, ancient. Neither of you moves. The air feels charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then, just as calmly, it turns and disappears into the trees. No sound, no panic. You sit there a long time after, sketchbook still open, pencil hovering in mid-air. You don't draw the wolf. You just write one sentence. I've never felt more seen. Back at the cabin, you can't shake the feeling. Not fear, not awe, something else. Like you've crossed an invisible threshold. Like all this time you've been watching the forest, and now, finally, it's watching back. Not as something foreign, not as a visitor, but as a fellow resident. That night, sleep comes slow. You lie in your cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady tick of meltwater dripping from the eaves. You think about the wolf, about what it means to be part of something without owning it, about how many hours you've spent in silence just to get to that single quiet moment. In the early hours, you wake to a new sound, not threatening, just unfamiliar. You pull on your boots and step outside. The sky is clear, stars scatter across it like frozen sparks, and beneath them, near the tree line, 3 pairs of eyes gleam back at you. Not glowing exactly, just catching the light in that unmistakable otherworldly way. Wolves, a small pack, standing still, not approaching, not retreating, just there. You don't reach for the rifle, you don't move at all. One of them makes a low, breathy sound, almost a huff, and then, as one, they vanish. Just like that. Gone. You stand there, barefoot in your boots, cold air threading through your shirt, and feel something settle in your chest. Not an epiphany, not a grand revelation, just the quiet, anchoring weight of belonging. The next day, you begin crafting a new section of the journal, Wildlife Behaviour Log. Not just dates and sightings, reflections, patterns, interpretations. You draw the wolf's silhouette from memory, write down the sound it made, note the breeze direction. You don't know if any of it will be useful, but that's not why you do it. You do it because now the wild isn't just a backdrop, it's a dialogue. It occurs to you that you haven't heard a human voice in months, but you've never felt more in conversation. There's a field of study called ethology, animal behaviour, studied under conditions as natural as possible. Some of its pioneers insisted the best way to learn about wild creatures was to become, for a time, something like them. Quiet, observant, alone. You think they were onto something. As the sun dips below the mountains again, painting the snow with streaks of pink and silver, you make a note in your log. First wolf sighting this close, no aggression. Mutual recognition. Then, beneath that, you write something you hadn't planned to. I'm not alone out here. You close the journal, set it gently on the shelf beside the others, and step back outside into the dusk. Somewhere beyond the trees the wolves are moving, and for the first time it feels like they know your name. The snow finally breaks, not all at once, not dramatically, but like ice in a glass slowly cracking under warm liquid. A drip becomes a stream becomes a creek, and the creek, that becomes the soundtrack to your days now. Constant, gurgling, alive. Water runs through the forest like veins reopening after a long, numb sleep. You wake one morning to the sound of it trickling past the cabin, and for a moment you think it's rain. But when you step outside, the sky is clear, it's just the earth shedding winter. The lake goes next. One day it's solid, and the next it's moving. The ice doesn't melt politely. It gives up in slabs and shards, splitting down the middle with loud, echoing cracks that reverberate through your chest. You watch it from the ridge, sitting cross-legged on a boulder, eyes wide as great chunks drift apart like tectonic plates on a miniature ocean. It's wild, violent, beautiful. You feel like you're watching a creature break free of a shell, shaking off the season like it was just an inconvenience. With the water returns the green, and it's sudden. One day you're surrounded by dead branches and frozen mud, and the next there's moss, everywhere, soft, springy, absurdly bright. It glows like it's backlit, clinging to rocks, curling up trees, lining the edges of your cabin like an enchanted carpet. Buds appear on branches. Shoots poke through the softening ground. It's as if the world was waiting just under the surface, held back like a breath, and now everything's exhaling at once. You plant your garden. It's modest, just a small patch cleared last fall, protected on 3 sides by a driftwood fence you assembled with more hope than carpentry. You till the soil with a homemade hoe, kneeling on a square of canvas to avoid soaking your knees. Your hands are raw, but you like it. There's something deeply honest about planting things you know you'll have to wait months to benefit from: beans, potatoes, a few hardy herbs, nothing fancy, just enough to feel like you're participating in the return of life. You talk to the seeds while you bury them, not in some Disney princess way, more like you're introducing yourself. Hello, little sprout. I'm the guy who hasn't spoken to another person in 6 months and currently smells like wet flannel and regret welcome to the neighbourhood. Back inside the cabin, you find yourself reorganising. Spring fever maybe, or just the urge to refresh. You sweep out every corner, beat the dust from your bedding, wash your clothes in melted snow and pin them to the line. They dry stiff, smelling of pine and smoke, and you realise how few items you actually need. A handful of shirts, 2 pairs of pants, socks with more patches than original fabric. But it's enough. Out here, it always is. Then comes the plane. You hear it before you see it, the low, familiar buzz of the engine echoing between peaks. You drop the saw you're using mid-cut, wipe your hands on your pants, and scramble to the clearing. The plane circles twice, banking low, and you wave even though you know they probably can't see you. It lands smoothly on the water, now fully thawed, and taxis toward the rocky shore with a slow hiss. Ed steps out again. Same old flannel, same crooked grin. "You look like you've been living with bears," he says. You nod. "One almost moved in." He tosses you a canvas-wrapped bundle. "Got mail and peanut butter. You're welcome." Inside the package is a letter from your brother, a copy of a book you mentioned in a letter months ago, and a bag of coffee so precious you consider building a shrine for it. You brew a cup right there on the stove while Ed flips through your wildlife log, eyebrows raised. "You weren't kidding," he mutters. "Wolves, huh?" You nod. "They're polite neighbours, quieter than most people." He chuckles, then sets the journal down and leans back. "You planning on heading back this year, or staying another?" You don't answer right away. You glance outside, at the lake, now rippling with wind, at the garden patch, the moss, the distant mountains with snow still clinging to their peaks. You think about the rhythm you've built, about the wolf that looked at you and didn't run, about how this place, with all its solitude and quiet trials, has become less of a challenge and more of a home. "Not sure yet," you say, still deciding. That's true, and it's not. Part of you knows you could stay here forever. The silence doesn't scare you anymore. The loneliness, when it comes, is something you understand now. It doesn't gnaw, it nudges. It reminds you to write, to notice, to reflect, to remember why you came. But another part of you still hears voices. Not in your head, thank you very much. In memory. Your brother's laugh, your mother's stories. Conversations you had years ago that drift back now, unannounced. You miss those sounds, you miss the ease of them. Still, for now, you're not going anywhere. Ed leaves the next day, but before he does, he says, "You know, they're making a documentary about you." You blink. "What?" He grins. Word got around. Park rangers talk. Some filmmakers want to fly out and get footage, interviews, the whole man versus wild angle. You shake your head, more amused than annoyed. "Tell them I'm camera shy." He nods. "I did, just thought you'd like to know." After he's gone, the lake stills again. The sound of the plane fades into the sky, and the quiet returns, like an old coat you slip back into. That night, you make a feast. Well, your version of one. Half a grayling fillet, the last of the onions, some beans, and real coffee. You light a candle, sit at your tiny table, and eat like someone who earned it. Later, you walk to the lake's edge and look up. The stars are returning sharp and clear. You see a satellite drift overhead, tiny, distant, silent. A reminder of the world that's still spinning without you. You wave at it, just in case. The next morning you wake up to the sound of something soft and persistent brushing against the cabin wall. At first it's easy to dismiss. Wind, maybe, or the long branch of a pine tree dragged low by spring's relentless soggy weight. But it doesn't stop. It comes in slow swipes, then pauses, then again, and again. You roll out of bed, squint through the window, and there he is, Clyde. Not skulking, not darting, just standing there like he's been waiting for hours. His tail swishes once and he glances toward the door. You open it. He doesn't flinch. He steps back a few feet, then turns and trots toward the edge of the woods, looking back once as if to say, "You coming or what?" You follow. You've never done this before. Not exactly. Clyde's always been around, of course. He's a constant, a mischief maker, the fox you pretend not to like while secretly tracking every move he makes. But this feels different. He's not just wandering, he's leading you. His ears twitch every few steps, and when you lag behind, he pauses until you catch up. It's ridiculous, honestly. Like some fairy tale subplot involving enchanted foxes and stubborn hermits. You cross the thawing edge of the forest, boots sinking into soft ground, and duck beneath low-hanging branches still crusted with old snow. After maybe 10 minutes, Clyde stops at a clearing. It's small, just a patch of moss-covered earth with one large stone in the centre. Around the base of the stone, bones, bird bones, small mammal bones, neat and white. It's not grotesque. It's arranged. You stand there a moment, watching Clyde sniff the air, then settle down beside the stone like he's claiming a seat in some ancient outdoor chapel. There's something ceremonial about it. Sacred, even. You don't step forward. You just nod. "I get it," you say softly. "Thanks for sharing." He doesn't respond, obviously. But after a few more minutes, he gets up and wanders off into the brush, tail flicking like punctuation. You wait a bit longer before heading back. The image of that stone, those bones, lingering in your mind like a poem you're still trying to understand. Later in the cabin, you try to write about it. You sketch the clearing, the shape of the stone, the arrangement. It occurs to you that even animals curate their lives in ways we don't give them credit for. Maybe that was Clyde's version of a scrapbook, or an altar, or a dining room. Maybe it was nothing at all. But the impulse to find meaning, that's human. That's your burden and your gift. The days begin to warm in earnest now. You shed layers. Start moving slower in the afternoons, not because you're tired, but because there's no rush anymore. The world isn't trying to kill you. Not today. The forest hums with birdsong, insects buzz in lazy loops through sunbeams, and the trees drip sap like they're exhaling. Everything is waking up. Then you feel oddly settled, not bored, not exactly comfortable, just aligned. You chop wood with a kind of easy grace now. You know just how long to soak the beans to avoid regrets. You can read the weather better than ever, smell rain before it hits, sense wind shifts in your skin. Even the cabin creaks in ways you understand, like it's speaking a language you've finally become fluent in. But you also feel a strange twinge, something close to restlessness. It starts as a thought. What if I did this somewhere else? Not because this place isn't enough, but because now you know you can do it. You've proven the thing to yourself. Survived the worst of it. Thrived even. So, what now? You scribble possible locations in your journal. Other lakes, deeper woods, a valley 200 miles south where a pilot once said the trout are as long as your forearm. You're not packing your bags. You're just wondering. Then you let the thought go. Mostly. Instead, you double down on the present. You build a new bench outside the cabin using some of the driftwood that washed up after the lake thawed. It's uneven and probably haunted by at least 3 dead trees, but it holds your weight and looks decent enough to brag about if Clyde ever starts rating your carpentry. You begin reading the book Ed brought. It's slower than you'd like, philosophical in a way that doesn't always match your mood, but there are passages that hit hard. One in particular stays with you. The man who returns from the woods is not the same man who entered them. He has been revised, sometimes gently, sometimes with violence, by the stillness he invited. You underline it, then write in the margin, still revising. Around this time you start waking up earlier, not out of anxiety, just habit. The sun creeps in sooner now, golden and warm, and you rise with it. You stretch, make coffee, and sit on the new bench with your journal balanced on your knee. These moments, before the world fully wakes, feel weightless, like you're floating between chapters of your life. You catch yourself smiling more, laughing even at the absurdities of this place. A squirrel stole a piece of your soap and then threw it up. Twice, on the steps you found a boot half buried in mud with a mouse nest in the toe. Your latest carving, a spoon, came out looking more like a confused duck. You named it Quackers. It still works. You realise you're no longer just surviving the wild, you're living with it. There's a fringe theory, mostly passed around by survivalists and pseudo-mystics, that if you stay in the wilderness long enough, it will start talking to you. Not metaphorically, but literally. Trees creak in patterns. Birds sing messages. The wind delivers whispers you don't quite understand but always feel compelled to write down. You don't buy into that. Not really. But sometimes, it does feel like the forest is trying to say something. And lately you've been listening closer. One morning, while checking the garden, you find the first sprouts, tiny green promises pushing up through the dark soil. You kneel down, touch them gently, and feel a surprising surge of pride. You planted these with your own calloused hands. You protected them from frost, watched over them, and now they've decided against the odds to grow. You whisper, "Welcome back," without meaning to. The weather turns warmer still. The bugs return in full force, which is less charming. You spend a few afternoons crafting a mosquito net from scraps of cheesecloth and prayer. It mostly works. You also cut new firewood, this time for the next winter. You can't help it. Preparation is part of who you are now. You mark off days in your journal, not out of boredom, but out of rhythm. This is what life looks like now. Not a blur of obligations, but a steady stream of small, intentional acts, the kind of living that teaches you the difference between time passing and time used. And then one evening it rains again. A soft, steady rain that falls like forgiveness. You lie in bed, listening to it drum against the roof, and think, if this is all life ever becomes, I'd still call it enough. You've been alone for nearly a year, and somehow that solitude has made the world feel full. Summer doesn't arrive like a guest. It barges in through the front door dripping sweat, barefoot, and dragging half the forest inside with it. One morning, you wake up to heat. Not warmth, heat. Heavy, sticky, undeniable. The kind of air that makes your shirts cling and your socks feel like betrayal. You roll out of bed and instantly regret existing under a roof. Outside, it's cooler, barely. You sit on the porch with your shirt unbuttoned and your feet in a basin of water like some frontier grandpa who's seen things. And somehow, everything is growing. You look at your garden and audibly gasp. It's exploded. Sprouts that were polite and hesitant last week are now wild, chaotic, vibrant leaves everywhere. Stalks thickening. Even the beans are climbing like they're trying to escape. You crouch there, poking around in the soil, awed. You whisper to them, "Okay, I see you," like you're meeting someone's new puppy. But the bugs. Oh, the bugs. They arrive like debt collectors and don't take no for an answer. You slap your neck more than you breathe. Your arms are speckled with bites in artistic clusters. You've tried every homemade repellent recipe. Pine tar, boiled spruce needles, crushed wild mint. Nothing stops the little demons. You hang strips of cloth soaked in vinegar around the windows like you're warding off vampires. You burn green leaves in the stove just to smoke them out. You even start talking to them. You can take the ankle, just leave the ear. The lake, now fully thawed and tempting, becomes your new best friend. You start bathing there daily, plunging in with a gasp that turns into a wheeze, then a laugh. You float on your back, staring at the endless blue sky and think, this is what wealth must feel like. Not money, just abundance. Clean water, sunlight, silence, time. You build a dock. Well, dock might be a generous word. It's a platform, a flat surface of lashed together driftwood and optimism, anchored by rocks and hope. But it floats, sort of. You sit on it in the evenings, legs dangling in the water, sipping your terrible camp coffee and watching fish ripple the surface. Sometimes you talk aloud, not because you're lonely, but because silence deserves company now and then. You say things like, "Not bad for a Tuesday," or "All right, Lake, impress me," as if you're at a stand-up show in nature's smallest venue. One evening you spot the moose again. Not the same one, probably. This one's leaner, younger, with a slower, curious gait. It moves through the shallows at the far edge of the lake, stopping to nibble on reeds, occasionally glancing your way. You don't move, you just sit and watch. It feels like a gift, the kind you don't announce or document, just accept. In your journal you start writing more like a storyteller and less like a reporter. Less, temperature 76 degrees Fahrenheit, windy southeast, and more, the trees look drunk today, swaying without rhythm. You sketch, not just diagrams, but scenes. The moose in profile. Clyde caught mid-slink. A pine cone you spent 10 whole minutes admiring before realizing you were doing it. Your handwriting has shifted too. More loose, less rigid. It flows now, like you're no longer writing for record but for yourself. There's a particular day, you don't even mark the date, where everything feels right. The sun is high, but not punishing. The wind is soft and cool. The lake reflects the sky so perfectly it hurts. You finish your chores early and wander into the woods without a goal, just curiosity. You follow no trail, you move slow, you listen. A raven calls overhead. Somewhere in the distance a tree groans and creaks as if yawning. You come upon a clearing you've never seen before. Circular, ringed by firs, moss-covered in the centre. It feels like a room no one's entered in decades. You stand at the edge, not wanting to intrude. There's nothing mystical about it, no sudden revelations or ghostly whispers, but something inside you quiets. You sit down on a dry log and just breathe. You stay for an hour, maybe two. You don't check your watch. You just exist. On your way back you see a fox, not Clyde, smaller, redder. It dashes across your path with a stick in its mouth, pauses to look at you, then keeps going. You smile and whisper, "Good luck." like you're speaking to a colleague headed into a meeting. When you return to the cabin, everything smells like sun-warmed wood and pine needles. You leave the door open, you eat dinner barefoot, you sleep without blankets for the first time all year. Your dreams are long, soft, full of colour. You wake up feeling like someone new. You begin carving again, this time not for use, just for beauty. A small totem of a loon, a crooked little bear, a fish that looks more like a cucumber but has character. You set them on the shelf above the stove and call it your gallery. You feel no need to explain it. Art is reason enough. You start seeing deer. First, just tracks, then shapes moving between the trees, then a doe, bold and unbothered, picking her way through your clearing like she has a reservation. She glances at your garden but doesn't eat anything. You pretend she's showing restraint out of respect. You leave out a piece of salt just in case this is your diplomacy now. Salt offerings and patient observation. The days stretch so long now it barely gets dark at night. The sun dips low but never disappears. Dusk becomes dawn without transition. You get used to it. You adjust your schedule. You nap when the shadows feel soft. You wake when the light changes angle. You eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're ready, work when the weather agrees. There's a theory, fringe as usual, that humans are meant for this kind of rhythm. Not clocks and 9-to-5s, but seasons and shadows. That we were built to sync with the sun, to slow down when it's dark, to bloom when it's bright. You believe it now, not because of science, because of your body, because of your mind, because you've never felt more in sync with the world around you. You realise one afternoon while sharpening your axe that you haven't spoken to another person in nearly 3 months. You test the theory by saying your name aloud. It sounds strange, not wrong, just unused, like a tool you haven't picked up in a while. You keep sharpening. You know the plane will return again soon. Ed will bring more supplies, maybe a note or two, maybe more questions about whether you're planning to stay another year. You haven't answered that question yet. You're not sure you need to. Because summer is here, fully, unapologetically, and you're too busy living to worry about what comes next. The lake is warm, the garden is green, the forest is wide, and for now, that's all the answer you need. The heat becomes a character of its own, persistent, stubborn, vaguely aggressive. You try to reason with it, standing shirtless in the shade, arms crossed, muttering, "All right, we get it." But it doesn't back down. The days blur into a long stretch of brightness and sweat. Even the trees look exhausted. You hear fewer bird calls during the high hours. They've retreated, hiding in the understory like old men under porch awnings. You adjust, of course. That's what this life demands. Constant negotiation. You do your work early before the sun climbs. You haul water from the lake at dawn, when the mist still clings to the surface like a veil. The garden needs daily tending now, practically drinking from your calloused hands. The beans have overtaken their supports, reaching up as if they might one day climb out of this place entirely. The potatoes are spreading underground like buried treasure, their tops crisp and eager. Midday, you become still. It's not laziness, it's survival. You lie on the shaded side of the cabin, arms behind your head, listening to the buzz of mosquitoes through the netting and the occasional splash of a fish leaping in the distance. You read, slowly, page by page, sometimes rereading whole chapters just to draw them out. You write too. But the words are different now, less introspective, more present. There's a story you start telling yourself, a fable really, about a man who walked into the woods to find silence and discovered that silence was louder than he expected. It loops in your head, shifting, growing, threading through your days. You don't try to finish it, you just live inside it. The wildlife is changing too. The birds that sang non-stop in early spring now perch quietly, conserving energy. You spot bear scat more frequently along the edges of your clearing, rich with berries and beetle shells. You stay alert. You've had no close calls since winter, but you keep the rifle cleaned and loaded just in case. The rules haven't changed, even if the scenery has. And then, one morning, you hear thunder, not close, just a low, rolling growl from the distance. The sky darkens on the western edge, and your body reacts before your mind does. You leap into action, pulling everything under cover, checking the roofline, shoring up the rain barrels. You learned your lesson last time. No more soaked blankets and mystery leaks. The storm arrives fast. Wind whips through the trees like it's chasing something. Leaves tear loose and swirl in frantic spirals. Then comes the rain. Not a drizzle, a deluge. It falls in sheets, hammering the roof like fists. You sit inside by the window watching the world wash itself. The lake goes dark. The trail becomes a stream. Even Clyde is nowhere to be seen. Smart little survivor. You light the stove just to keep the damp at bay. The cabin fills with warmth and wood smoke again. It's a scent you didn't realise you missed until it was back. You make tea and sit with it in your lap, both hands wrapped around the mug like it's a hearth of its own. Outside, the storm rages. Inside, you're unmoved. There's a kind of reverence that takes hold during storms. You speak less. You listen more. You remember your smallness. You don't try to fight the weather. You respect it, let it pass, and feel better for having stayed put. This place has taught you that. The difference between stubbornness and patience. When the rain slows to a whisper, you step out into the clearing. Everything is gleaming. The moss glows green. The trees drip like they've just stepped from a bath. You walk barefoot across the soft earth, muddy and grinning. You don't care about the mess. You feel baptized. And then, from the far edge of the lake, a sound. A long, wavering call, melancholy and beautiful. A loon. You haven't heard one in weeks, maybe longer. But here it is again, sliding across the surface like an elegy. You close your eyes and let it carry you. It's impossible not to feel something in the bones when a loon cries. It's ancient, lonely, wild. You answer it with silence. Later you find yourself carving again. This time, the shape of a loon. It's rough. You can't quite get the beak right and the wings are uneven, but it feels right. You smooth the back with a stone, run your fingers along it and place it beside the other creatures on the shelf. Your little wooden family, your audience. You notice as you sit back that the cabin has taken on a life of its own. It creaks with personality. The logs are darkened by age and smoke. Every object has its place now, not just for convenience, but because it belongs there. You've stopped reorganizing, you've stopped second-guessing, you've stopped needing everything to be perfect. It just is. Your hands are rougher than they've ever been. Your face is tanned, your beard wild, your clothes patched into near abstraction. You look in the mirror occasionally and think, I wouldn't recognize this guy a year ago, but you like him. You like what he's become. There's a theory among certain historians that true freedom isn't found in breaking rules. It's found in building a life where rules aren't necessary, where rhythm replaces structure, where respect replaces law. You think about that as you watch the steam rise from your tea. You think about how rarely you use your watch anymore, how time is now measured in temperature, light, hunger, and sound. A few nights later, another storm rolls in, but this time it feels familiar, like a song you've heard before, now remixed in summer's key. The wind hits the cabin like a greeting instead of a threat. The thunder doesn't shake you, it reminds you of winter, of the silence that once surrounded you, of how far you've come. You sit on the porch this time under the overhang, rain pouring just inches from your toes. You lean back, sip something warm, and smile like someone who's not waiting for the world to change anymore. You've already changed. And somewhere out there beyond the curtain of falling rain, you hear the wolves again. Faint, distant, but real. You whisper, still here, and raise your mug in salute. The storm answers with another crack of thunder, and this time it sounds like applause. The days now are slow in the most luxurious way. They unspool like soft yarn. No sharp edges, no rush. You wake with the sun already filtering through the trees, golden and easy, like it's in no hurry either. There's no alarm, no deadline. Just light, the soft creak of the cabin's timbers, and the scent of pine drifting in through the open window. You stretch like a cat, bones popping gently, and roll out of bed with a grunt that's halfway between complaint and gratitude. The garden is thriving. Your beans now climb so high you have to duck under them to check on the back rows. The potatoes are flowering, delicate pale blooms that feel like tiny fragile trophies. The herbs smell stronger in the heat. You crouch down every morning to pinch off leaves, rubbing them between your fingers just for the scent. Basil, mint, thyme. Nothing extravagant, but you feel like a chef every time you sprinkle fresh green into your evening stew. You even talk to the plants now, not like a lunatic. Like a neighbour, like someone who's learned respect. Fishing's good too. You've gotten better. not just at the act of catching, but at reading the water. You can tell when they're biting based on the ripples, the air pressure, the faint vibration in your fingertips as the line whispers across the surface. You catch grayling regularly, trout if you're lucky. You clean them quickly, skillfully now, no wasted motion. You don't take more than you need. You never do. You start leaving small pieces of fish out for the foxes. Clyde has a family now, 3 kits that tumble through the underbrush like clumsy little shadows. You spot them from time to time, wrestling in the clearing or trailing behind their parents with the cautious curiosity of toddlers. One even sniffs the steps of your cabin while you sit motionless inside, heart thudding like a drum. They vanish before you can move, but it's enough. You've been accepted, or at least tolerated, which in the animal kingdom is basically sainthood. Your hair's longer now, unruly. You tie it back some days, others you let it blow wild in the breeze like some unbothered poet-turned-wild man. You trim your beard when it starts trying to annex your neck entirely. You've forgotten what your face looked like clean-shaven. You don't miss it. Ed flies in again late one morning, the engine's drone bouncing off the lake and catching you halfway through a task you've now forgotten. You wave, lazy. He lands with his usual smooth arrogance, steps out holding a tin of coffee and a newspaper rolled tight and secured with a rubber band. Civilization still standing, you ask? Barely, he says, handing over the paper. You didn't miss much. Unless you were dying to read about city council drama and a moose breaking into a bakery in Talkeetna. You laugh. I'll survive. He doesn't stay long this time. Just long enough to trade a few words, help you unload some supplies, and nod approvingly at your garden. You're really doing it, huh? He says. Whole season? Maybe longer? You shrug. It doesn't feel like a stunt anymore. He raises an eyebrow. So what's it feel like? You think about it, then say, normal. Better than normal. He nods, doesn't argue. Before he leaves, he hands you a small envelope. It's from your brother. A handwritten note on yellow paper. No real news. Just a handful of memories, a few dumb jokes, a sentence that reads, Mum would have loved this place. You read that one twice, then again. Then fold the note and tuck it into the back of your journal. There's a long-standing debate among environmental historians about the concept of rewilding. Not just the land, but the self. They argue about whether humans can ever truly become part of nature again, or whether we're too domesticated, too tied to the myth of progress. You don't weigh in, but you know this much. You've shed things, layers assumptions, habits you didn't even know you had. You no longer fill silences with sound. You don't eat because it's noon. You eat when your body asks. You don't plan your day in hours. You move when the sun shifts. You sleep when it gets dark, even if that's midnight, and wake up without regret. Your calendar is the trees. Your clock is the wind. And still, there are surprises. Like the time a black bear wanders through your camp at dawn. You see it from the porch, massive, deliberate, lumbering through like it owns the place you freeze, coffee halfway to your lips. It pauses, sniffs the air, and then continues on without even glancing your way. You let out a slow breath and realise your pulse is thudding in your ears like a war drum. You note it in your journal, July 18th, black bear, calm, no confrontation. Reminder, everything here is bigger and less impressed by me than I think. Later that week, you build a smokehouse. Nothing fancy, just a frame and a fire pit with green wood to slow burn the fish. You test it with a few trout and end up with smoky, flaky perfection that makes you feel like a pioneer or a very proud raccoon. You eat one piece immediately. The rest, you store for the harder days. It becomes a game almost, a way to outpace the season. You're already stacking firewood, preserving food, mending clothes, prepping the cabin's insulation. Not because winter's breathing down your neck, but because you know it will. This is the rhythm now. Work in the sun, prepare in the calm, survive the dark. You find an old pine branch in the forest shaped almost exactly like a walking stick. You carve it smooth over several evenings by the fire. It's a luxury, really. You don't need it. But it feels like a mark of time. Something you'll take with you when the time finally comes to leave. And that idea, leaving, has started to creep in again. Not in a dramatic way, not in panic or desire, just in the soft, inevitable sense of chapters shifting. You think about what it would mean to return, to hear voices again, to walk down a street, to drink something cold from a glass with ice. It doesn't feel wrong, it just feels distant. There's a term in anthropology, liminal space. It means the threshold between what was and what comes next, a place where identity shifts. You didn't come out here to find a liminal space, but that's what this became, a doorway. And now you're standing in it, one hand on the frame, the other still brushing bark. You sit on your dock that night, a full moon rising behind the pines. The lake is silver and still. You hear the wolves again, fainter now, moving higher into the hills. You imagine them watching you from the trees just for a moment. Then you imagine nothing at all, just you, the lake, the night. And for now, that's more than enough. You start to notice the light changing. It's subtle at first, a different slant through the trees. Shadows that hang a little longer in the morning, stretch a little farther in the evening. The air still feels warm, still hums with the thick buzz of summer's final song, but something in your skin knows. The sun is shifting, the season is tilting. You've lived here long enough now to hear time move, even when it moves quiet. The garden confirms it. The leaves on your beanstalks begin to yellow at the edges. The potato plants go limp, not from thirst, but because their work is done. You harvest with reverence, pulling roots from the earth like gifts. You spread everything on the cabin porch, potatoes, onions, herbs, the last handful of berries you managed to beat the birds to. It looks like wealth. No, better. It looks like independence, laid out in dirt and skin. You preserve what you can. The little smokehouse works like a charm. You slice fish into long strips, hang them with practiced care, tend the fire just right to keep the bugs out and the moisture gone. The smell lingers in your clothes, in the wood grain of the cabin, in your beard. You don't mind. It smells like readiness. You've been alone now for over a year. Not just off the grid, not just social detox. Truly, completely, unflinchingly alone. You wonder how many people can say that and mean it. You've lost count of the days, but you know the feeling of each one. What it's like to wake up in February and wonder if you'll survive the cold. What it's like to plant seeds in April with fingers that still remember frostbite. What it's like to sit in July's heat, blinking at the sky, thinking, I don't miss anything, except maybe now, just a little. You're not lonely, but you're curious. What would it feel like to sit across from someone again? Not in a city, not at a party, just here. A second cup on the table, a voice in the stillness, a shared laugh at how stubborn the squirrels are. You'd probably talk too fast at first, over-explain, try to make them understand everything at once. Then you'd settle, let the quiet do the work again. Still, no decisions, not yet. August comes in like a sigh, warm and heavy but restless. The forest is loud now, not with birdsong but with insects, leaves, life cracking at the edges. You can hear the cycle shifting. Squirrels are stockpiling. The bears are bolder. One tears through the far edge of your compost pile one night and leaves nothing but a trail of footprints and a mildly offended chipmunk. You nod in respect. They're just preparing, like you. You keep your rifle closer, just in case. You start writing more again, long entries in the evenings, your candle burning low, the moths bumping against the window screen like they're trying to tell you secrets. Your handwriting's smoother now, less cramped, more confident. You flip through the old pages sometimes and can see the whole arc of your year. Wonder, survival, monotony, clarity, and now, peace. There's an old letter from your brother tucked into the back flap of your journal. You read it again, for the 10th or 100th time. It reminds you of the world outside, still spinning. He mentioned your name once showed up in an article, something about modern hermits, or off-grid philosophers. You snorted at that. But you clipped the page anyway, tucked it in the rafters. A reminder that you existed to someone, somewhere. One evening, while walking the shoreline, you find a rock shaped like a heart, perfectly smoothed, rounded, just obvious enough to make you stop and laugh. You pick it up, turn it over in your hand, then set it on the windowsill beside the loon carving. Not everything needs a story. Some things can just be. The loons are calling more often now. Maybe they sense the season's end too. Their songs seem longer, more mournful. You find yourself humming along not in imitation, just as accompaniment. You start packing slowly, not because you're leaving tomorrow, not even next week, but because the idea of leaving is no longer absurd, it's becoming real. You sort through your belongings, few as they are, and ask yourself, what do I want to carry out of here? Some things are obvious, the journal, the carvings, A few tools worn smooth by your own hands, a tin cup dented in 3 places but deeply beloved. Other things, books, extra clothes, cracked plates, you're not sure about. They belong to this place now, not to you. You'll leave them behind. You write one last entry in a new notebook. Title it, Things I Want to Remember. It's not a list, not exactly, just phrases. The way the lake breathes, the fox kits tumbling in dusk light, the silence between loon calls, how cold feels when it's respected, how warmth tastes when it's earned. You stop there, pen resting in the margin. You don't cry, but you sit very still. There's a scholarly debate in environmental psychology, whether solitude out in nature transforms the human psyche, or simply strips it down to what was already there. You've come to your own conclusion. It does both. It reveals, then rebuilds. It tears down, then gives you the tools. You came here to test yourself. You stayed because the test became a life. And now you're someone who could return to the world, who might. You leave the garden for the next creature. The fish will swim, the moss will thicken, the wolves will pass through like they always do. The cabin will stand or it won't. You hope it does. You leave notes for the next soul who finds it, scratched into the underside of the table. Don't rush. The silence will teach you what you came for. You light one last fire, not out of need, but because endings deserve warmth. You sit by it with your cup of coffee, watching the smoke curl into the dark like a farewell letter rising skyward. When you step outside, the moon is waiting. You inhale, exhale. You whisper not to anyone in particular, thank you. And the night answers, quiet, calm, full. You're not alone, not now, not ever. The next morning you rise before the sun. Not because you have to, there's nothing chasing you anymore, but because something inside says it's time. The air is crisp, like early fall trying to make a cameo before summer's done. You dress slowly, layering more than usual, and make coffee with the last of the good grounds, pouring it into your battered tin cup. Then you step out onto the porch, cradling the heat in both hands. The lake is perfectly still, a glassy mirror stretched from shore to shore. Mist hovers over the surface in soft whirls, shifting shapes you could almost mistake for breathing things. You sit on the edge of your makeshift dock, feet dangling above the water, and watch the world wake up around you one final time. The cabin behind you creaks a little, settling. It'll hold through the next season. You know this. You've left it better than you found it inside. Everything's cleaned, sorted, packed, or gifted to the forest. You left some extra firewood, a couple of your carvings, even a tin of tea you know you'll miss more than you expect. You walk the perimeter one last time, slowly. Your boots leave soft imprints in the damp moss, and each step feels like a quiet goodbye. The fox trail near the garden, the ridge path with the best view, the hollow log where you once found a sleeping rabbit. All the places that became familiar without you realizing it. Spaces that shaped you, just by letting you exist in them. You pause at the edge of the clearing and look back. The cabin, with its crooked chimney and moss-covered roof. The garden fence, now half covered in climbing beans. The trees that held watch over you all this time. You nod a small private gesture, then you turn and walk forward. The trail is overgrown in places, but you don't mind. You know the way now. And wherever the path leads, town, silence, a new wilderness, or just home, you're taking it as someone who learned how to be alone, not to escape the world, but to understand how to rejoin it. No fanfare, no final scene, just a quiet, steady return. Because sometimes the biggest thing you find in the wild is yourself.